OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.
All right, you're very welcome along. It's Wednesday morning and it is Republic of Ireland International Day. Evan Ferguson's going to start. We learned that yesterday in the press conference. Gentlemen, are we excited?
Absolutely. Start of a new era, Ger. It's going to bring us back to the big time, baby.
Well, I mean, certainly it's the start of it. Obviously, tonight's not the start of the campaign. The campaign starts in earnest against France. You don't look excited at all, Johnny.
No, I am excited. I think the whole friendly tonight has been illuminated by the fact that Evan Ferguson is starting his first Irish senior start, and B, I have so many question marks about the rest of the team, where they're at, some of the peripheral players, some of the players that definitely will start Monday, what sort of formation he's going to play. So also the fact that it's pretty much sold out, and we'll be able to compare it to the atmosphere at the recent rugby games when France come on Monday. What's better, an Ireland rugby game or an Ireland football game?
The France game is obviously the comparison as opposed to tonight, where there's nothing at stake.
Nothing at stake, but a big crowd, as Stephen Kenny was keen to point out again yesterday, which I think, in fairness, he's right. It is a friendly against Latvia on a Wednesday night, 5 days before the biggest game of the campaign, and there's going to be probably up on 40,000 at it.
They did sell the ticket as the tickets, but the tickets were perfectly reasonably priced. And again, not doing a rugby comparison, but here's a rugby comparison. The football tickets are actually fairly affordable, and much. I think they didn't fleece the fans at all. I think the tickets were maybe 110 for the two, which isn't bad. You're getting France at home, and tonight will actually be a good game. We don't get that many games at home either.
If you got in early, I think the tickets were probably very reasonably priced. I am always a little bit uncomfortable with the packaging. I fully understand the economics behind it, but there's a huge Irish football fan base in Donegal and Mayo and Galway and Kerry, and you're saying if you want to go to that France game, get yourself up to Dublin 5 days beforehand as well, or just buy the ticket, which I'd imagine probably few people have done. Bought the ticket and just not going to go tonight.
Yeah, well, you'd hope that they're passing them on to somebody or they're selling them on.
Go to Toutless or whatever and just flog it for the price that you get.
Yeah. It is the second best / best team in the world with the best player in the world coming to play the first competitive game of a new campaign. I think Gavin Cooney get a figure of 65 quid was the earliest price. And we've had people complaining to us, writing into us about the cost of the tickets. And at the last minute, the tickets are really expensive, but the only tickets that are left are premium, right?
Yeah, I think it's that the ad probably hasn't changed. So the ad has been everywhere for the last 3 months for this bundle package. Whereas now when you click on it, the only tickets left are very expensive, but they're premium level tickets as far as I'm aware.
The other thing is that if you bought the season ticket, it's something like 450 quid for 2 adults and 2 kids for every home game. So that's the thing to do, is to buy the season ticket a year in advance. And you've got to plan a year in advance. And the FAI obviously are a fairly easy thing to kick because everybody's been kicking them basically the entire time that they've existed. But it looks like they're going to fill the stadium twice, and it looks like they're turning a corner culturally, and it looks like they've taken some baby steps along the way. All they need now is Evan Ferguson.
Yeah, you're always going to sell out a home game against France, and they've got the Netherlands in the group. It's actually the best season in a long time to get your season ticket, and the fact that
they've sold out now, obviously.
The absolute perfect opportunity. And France, yes, they finished runners up in the World Cup, but I think they're the most devastating team to play against. Argentina probably aren't going to beat you 5-0 if they're on a good night. I think Ireland, you could set up against them and hold them. I think if France come all guns blazing and they're on it, and Antoine Griezmann gets his birthday cake last night and he thinks actually all is forgiven. Thank you, Didier.
To explain that, sorry, they it was They fixed the Yaya situation?
They did. So obviously all the rumours coming out of the French squad swirling that Antoine Griezmann's thinking about retiring from international football.
After this break, yeah.
He is so upset about the fact that Kylian Mbappe was made captain after Hugo Lloris's retirement. But they had their squad meal last night. Everybody around one giant table, everybody in the squad, and out was rolled as big a birthday cake as I've ever seen for 32-year-old Antoine Griezmann, and he looked very happy and he made a little speech. He had his pink hair, all that.
Okay.
He looked happier with life.
Matt Doherty says he's a good fella. Says a few weeks after he arrived at Atletico, there was barbecue in his gaff and he looked after everybody. I don't know what that means. I don't know. Here's a Rolex for you.
When you go to somebody's barbecue at their gaff and you don't get looked after, they're the worst barbecues.
But what does it mean?
He said don't bring anything, but he actually meant it.
Well, I was thinking more. Here's a present for you and a present for you. You know, it's like, or is it just there's an extra portion of wings?
Doherty starting captain is quite interesting as well, because I don't know where he's at, to be honest, sure. I mean, and he's one of those players where he hasn't played since he's made the move. I think there are question marks, and Nathan and I were talking about this pre-show. I don't know who plays right wing back on Monday. I don't know, does he want to play Doherty left wing back, because there are a lot of quandaries there. I thought Callum O'Dowda seems to be coming into his affection now, and even our centre back situation doesn't look straightforward. And apart from Josh Cullen, the midfield situation, I'm not entirely sure what system he's going to play. How does he have Evan Ferguson starting, but who does he play beside him?
Look, there's two different things. There's what he does tonight, and there's what he does on Monday night,
and how much they're actually related.
Let's speculate on that in just 1 minute. Here's what's coming up between now and 10 o'clock for you. The power rankings. Tommy Rooney's patented Gaelic football, inherited of course from Owen Sheehan. Cian Tracey is going to give us his Six Nations team in the tournament at 25 minutes past 8. John Duggan's going to join us at 8:50. Enda McNulty is going to talk to us about his new book, which has loads of really interesting rugby nuggets in it, and some good GAA stuff too. Commit to Lead, and then Gavin Cooney from last night. The Indo have picked a team, and they've picked a 3-5-2 with Collins, Egan and O'Shea. We think Egan won't start though, right?
Just listening to Stephen Kenny in the press conference, he was asked about linking the two games together and the usual challenge he has of players who played lots of games and players who played no games, and mentioned some of the players at the top half of the championship who they need to manage their load. So maybe he goes for the first 45 minutes with as close to France, but John Egan has played a huge amount of games, doesn't really need to see him, knows what he's about. Darragh O'Shea be similar, but it's obviously quite a bit younger. Egan had a very stressful game, you would imagine, at the week. I know it was in the FA Cup, but it was a huge game for Sheffield United, so maybe he feels Egan, this is one he could sit out. Bring Omobamidele in.
Yeah, and big fan of Andrew Omobamidele. So sorry, he's got a back three of Collins, Egan and O'Shea, and then his five are obviously the wing backs are O'Dowda and Doherty. We know Doherty's going to start because he's captain. It's Knight, Cullen and Malumbi are his three in midfield, and then he's gone for Obafemi and Ferguson. I think this is Aidan Fitzmaurice's team in the end.
I'd love to see Obafemi and Ferguson up front together. I think it has massive potential, and tonight is seemingly the game to go with it. It might be, it's hard to see those two starting against France because it's probably a bit too aggressive out of possession. I don't know how well that would work, but I think the 3-5-2, I don't think that's probably far off the team tonight. I think the two wing backs will be O'Dowda and Doherty, but I would love to see, like, Ferguson is coming in after the weekend that he had, and I know you're playing against Grimsby, but just I was kind of on, when I saw the games on TV, I was like on Ferguson watch, and I was like, this is cool. You can just sit and watch Evan Ferguson playing and watch his movement when he's playing against a mass defence as Grimsby were, and he was able to just find little pockets and got two amazing goals. And with Obafemi's, he's obviously a very good goal scorer and he's a lot of pace, but he's a good player to link up as well with the likes of Ferguson, and I would like to see that tonight, but I'm far from sure what he'll start. I don't know, what do you think, Nate?
No, I don't think Obafemi will start against France unless something happens tonight where he is absolutely outstanding. Like, he has shown actually this season he's very good off the bench, and if you can keep it tight with 15 minutes to go, throw him on, set pieces, nick a goal, scrappy in there, do something. I think, like, Bazunu will probably start in goal tonight, though there must be a temptation to give Kelleher some minutes just in case something was to happen Bazunu over the next 4 or 5 days. Give
Bazunu the start, bring Kelleher on at half time.
Yeah, exactly.
What's Bazunu's confidence like at the moment?
Well, things have turned a little bit for Southampton. They've got a new manager.
Did he not play really well against Man United?
He did. It was brilliant against Manchester United. They've started to keep a few more clean sheets. It is hard to know because on the one hand you look at, it's been a nightmare season for Southampton. He's made quite a few mistakes, but he's by far and away the youngest goalkeeper playing in the Premier League. I imagine Elam Melia is probably the only one anyway within the same ballpark. And he's playing every single week, so they've put that trust in him.
Yeah.
So coming into this occasion now, actually is fine from. It's not as if France is going to be a massive step up to the strikers he's facing every single week.
Yeah, he's played against Erling Haaland.
Now he's conceded goals against all these strikers. So there is that
he could
concern.
play both. He could give them a half each night. Wouldn't be a bad thing at all.
No, that's the perfect scenario.
I think when you look at building towards Monday, there are, as Johnny said, probably 3, maybe 4 places up for grabs. The 2 wing back positions, the spot alongside Ferguson, and maybe one in midfield, but I kind of think midfield, I would be surprised if he didn't go with the back 3.
Well, a very different team from
Collins, Egan, O'Shea.
Very different thing from John Fallon in the paper. His back three today for this game, right, for the Latvia game, is O'Shea, Collins and Omobamidele, which I think is potentially more likely given your point about Egan, right, and the soundings in the press conference. O'Dowd at left wing back, which I think has he hinted at that as well, because that seems to be fairly consistent. I managed to catch 70 minutes of a game recently where they were playing. I thought he looked good. Looked fully fit and physical and very aggressive, and it was against Blackburn.
The left wing backs, we don't
Terrible game of football.
We don't have any really solid alternative. So you could make a case for
Doherty left wing back and Seamus Coleman right wing back.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to happen though. Like it's not balanced to be playing Doherty left wing back, particularly when he's not even playing right wing back for his club at the moment.
Well, Doherty played on the left away at Portugal, and it worked really well. What goes against it is Coleman's last appearance on the right of what we say is a midfield, but it'll be far more defensive obviously against France, was the game against Armenia where they were beaten, and I think everyone left that game going, Seamus Coleman will never play in that position again. But Coleman, I've watched a lot of Everton over the last month and I've commentated on a lot of Everton. He is playing as well as he has played in the last fight. He's certainly playing as well as he's ever played at club level since Stephen Kenny took charge. And the one thing that really stands out when you watch Coleman is we know he's very strong defensively and he can do all the last ditch stuff. I've never seen him get into the opposition box as much.
I know,
as he has been under Sean Dyche. Like we all have this opinion of Dyche. He's obviously playing Sean Dyche 4-4-2, doesn't let the wing backs go forward, rock solid. Like Coleman, he got the goal against Leeds, but we did a game against Forest. He must have had more touches in the opposition penalty area in that than he's had in any Premier League game. He was constantly up there. So there's an energy.
There is.
It's a weird one against France because Mbappe is going to be on that left-hand side. So you want to be strong defensively, but actually that's also your one opportunity. So that's why I think maybe Ogbene will play out there and try and expose the gaps that are left by...
So Ogbene is playing as an auxiliary striker / right wing back defensively.
Yeah.
And like that...
My team right now would be...
Can I finish this?
Go on, you finish his team for tonight. We're talking about two different teams.
Fallon's team, I think.
This is Fallon's team,
John.
which I think is... so it's Brown, Hendrick and Ogbene playing as three in midfield, and he's got Ferguson and Obafemi up front, which is a super attacking team, and I'd really like to see this. Brown, Hendrick and Ogbene. I do think Knight is going to play in the game. I think Malumbi's going to play in the game against France. So I don't know, do you start with this and then you...
I think that's a rest Josh Cullen, and he doesn't have a like-for-like replacement for Josh Cullen. It was
Brown, Hendrick and Ogbene, and he does
maybe he plays Hendrick slightly deeper in a role that he says he doesn't particularly like him in as a number 6, just to get him just for tonight and
for
to
game
get those
time.
players on the pitch.
I think the back three, Omobamidele and O'Shea and Collins, I think that looks fairly likely to me, in the sense of it makes complete sense. You're giving two lads who probably do need a bit of game time, a start, and with the player beside them who's actually been playing week to week. And I love that back three going forward for Ireland. I think it has so much going for it. And what's interesting as well is what will we be like in possession tonight? Like, we can be very slow to move the ball against teams that, albeit like Kenny says, Latvia aren't going to be uber defensive. We do need to kind of pass the ball at pace, and you can imagine as well, just speaking of the Lansdowne Road crowd, you can imagine the noise when Evan Ferguson starts getting into positions or gets his first chance. And it is exciting. Like I was asked, like, what, my girlfriend goes, what's this Evan Ferguson like? And I was like, well,
an hour later,
since Robbie Keane, we haven't really had anything remotely approaching an exciting striker, really. So it's a long time here.
We've been clutching at straws.
And also, I was saying, Robbie Keane physically compared to this lad, like, there's no comparison.
As Robbie himself said it to John Duggan, he was like, well, he's obviously, similar to me, a bit bigger than me. It's kind of unfair how big he is. One other thing, which we have not spoken about at any point since John Duggan did that interview with Robbie Keane at Cheltenham. I'm going to back the real whacker, because as everybody knows, that was my nickname with the Ireland team. I was like, does everybody know that?
Never heard that before.
No, I'd never heard. When he said that, I was like, the whacker?
I was like, what? Robbie Whacker Keane? I'd never heard this. I have yet to verify with Kev that everybody just called him Whacker. I did not know that at all. That was breaking news. We buried the lead. It's a week later, it finally dawned on me. Are there other secret names?
It's a good piece, Kev, Saturday, I thought, about like international breaks and basically rushing over on Saturday night to have the pints in Dublin.
I missed it.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah,
I
really grown into that.
The pints in Dublin don't happen quite as regularly for these young guys.
No. Although he tried to imply at the end that there was kind of a nexus between him and the young lads going over now. Can't wait to get on that flight on the Saturday night, but I don't think it's the same rules apply anymore.
I think they're very excited about it, but hopefully not for the pints. And look, if they're having a few pints, I've definitely matured on the whole. You can have a few pints if you want.
Apparently, Evan Ferguson's problem when he wants to, if he, I don't know if he, like most young players, probably doesn't even go for pints. His biggest problem is that all his mates are still in school,
right?
So can't go out on a Sunday night when he rocks into Dublin.
Yeah, I doubt he's a pints man, to be honest.
I think the Leaving Cert and the post junior cert kids are actually going out a bit more, Nathan, than they did in our days.
Oh, really?
I think they are. I think that there's a more easy attitude towards this thing now. Laser Snake says, what would constitute a success for Kenny this campaign?
Well, this is, I think, the most difficult question, because before the draw was made, it was very simple, whether you were pro Kenny, anti Kenny, whatever your feelings were on it, that they had to qualify one way or another. But now when you look at it, like, nobody's expecting them to finish above France and the Netherlands. I think they'll need a result. I think they'll need a moment at some stage during the campaign. I don't think they can afford to get battered on Monday night. I think, he's still on the back foot with an awful lot of people, with the way last year ended and the slip up at the end against Armenia. But I think nights like tonight are also important, because actually that's been the biggest disappointment, are the home games, whereas you said, Stephen Kenny's talking about dominating possession against these sort of teams like Latvia, playing good, strong, attacking football, and too often in those games, like that match against Armenia, you're right, like it was so slow at times. It could have been anybody, any Ireland manager watching that match against Armenia.
Yeah.
That they need to be front foot, possession football, take the game at home to Latvia, get it forward quickly to Evan Ferguson, get a few goals, and then be able to see it out.
Well, that's why it feels like he kind of has to pick. So I can't even remember who was having this conversation with about, like, why would you pick the same team for the France game as you would against the Latvia game? You need a completely different style to beat Latvia than you do France. But if you're the manager and you want to hone things, and you've, like, training is training, but matches are matches, and all of a sudden you've got an opportunity to put the full team at some stage for 15, 20, 25 minutes, to put the full team out and go, this is going to be the team, lads, right? Show me what you've got. I don't know.
I know they're contractually obliged, obviously, to have these friendlies, but, like, this is not a bad thing. Do you really want to go into that France game cold with, they've been off for some time? The narrative has also changed since we last saw this Irish team, with some of the players, like, we were, probably going a little bit over the top about Collins after the Ukraine games, and I certainly thought this was the performance of a player that's going to be one of our best defenders, if not one of our best players that we have. And he's had, like, a baptism of fire, obviously, in the Premier League, but, like, one thing I would say, Nathan, is we should not be afraid of thinking we can finish above one of those teams in this group. Like, France, say if France beat Netherlands in both their games, the Netherlands have serious question marks around their goalkeeper, from what I can tell. I didn't think they were amazing in the World Cup. I thought they're a good side. They're not an incredible side. We have Evan Ferguson now. If Evan Ferguson starts taking off during this campaign, if he does start taking off, we have a striker that we just haven't had.
I know.
If he starts taking off, we still have some really good defenders. So if we could manage to...
Two giant ifs are, world superpower needs to drop 3 levels, and ours is, kind of minnow, needs a superstar.
We should probably have beaten Portugal in Portugal, really, and that was without Evan Ferguson. We had Connolly that night, who was miles off form. We should have beaten Portugal away. We should definitely.
The confidence comes from those. Ireland's best performances under Stephen Kenny have been in the better teams.
We should be capable of beating the Netherlands in one of those games, in my view. If we can keep a clean sheet, we'll probably win the game. Let's not be like saying, we can't finish in the top 2, because
we're not going to lose it.
Yeah, we're not. I do believe there's
maybe the better option is that the Dutch beat the French on Friday night. They get a couple of injuries. They're in absolute disarray. You look when you beat France and they struggle to get it back together. But I think getting a result over in Greece is going to be crucial. Yeah. They need some momentum. That's been the biggest problem for Stephen Kenny. Every time there's been a bright new dawn, and away in Portugal, young players come in, he gives them their start, and then they come back to Dublin and it falls a bit flat. And they let in goals.
Well, several of that
lose a game they shouldn't lose.
Several of that team didn't kick on, and they have found themselves out of form or out of the team at club level.
Well, Ida and Oma Bamidele, I don't think either have even been in a squad for the last 18 months because of injury. Never mind starting a game. So, like that, again, when you talk about getting carried away, like, we staked so much on the two of them being a part of that team for the next 10 years.
And they were so impressive. So Quirky 1980 says, let's go into full hype mode and make Ferguson captain. I can see how if this campaign doesn't work out for Kenny, the next manager will come in and go, you're my captain, and away we go.
His mentality is incredible. I do remember Keith Long, one of the things, I think it was Keith Long who said it, and I stand corrected if it weren't, but he was like, if Evan Ferguson could effectively train all day, every day, or play football all day, every day, he absolutely would. And he just seems to be bulletproof in that regard. And what I liked about him on Sunday...
So you're saying he's a combination of Haaland and Wayne Rooney on the ball.
I don't like those kind of... I don't like any comparisons.
Cristiano Ronaldo off the field.
Any Haaland comparisons to me are just absolutely bonkers, like in the sense of you putting pressure on the player. But just on Sunday... watching, he kept doing everything right. He was so patient, and the control for that goal. Like honestly, even against Grimsby, that's an amazing goal. He then has a goal disallowed that wasn't his fault, so he could have had a hat trick.
Both finishes were great.
The second one as well. The touch to make the space.
The second one, you're like, he's just going to score this, and you do feel in front of goal. Ferguson will score if he gets a chance tonight.
Well, I was probably like you, not at the weekend against Grimsby, in that you just watch all the Brighton games now and you're watching every single movement. But I was over at the game where he got injured against Liverpool and found myself doing the exact same thing. I couldn't tell you anything that happened in the game except for Evan Ferguson. But what I thought was really impressive was he found himself at times a little bit out of it, but he...
middle-aged man perving over a teenage boy.
Like, it was and I was...
How did you put it that way?
He'd give the ball away and I'd be like, oh, well, this isn't a good sign.
Then he'd be just like...
But this isn't a good sign. Like,
It
you can't be giving the ball away at this level, and 2 seconds later
it
gets it back.
It'd come to a vastly more experienced player and they'd give it away. Like, these things happen. But he dropped back constantly into midfield just to start getting himself involved, just to get a few touches. And that was the bit, actually, that when Liverpool were on top, he was still involved in the game, that you kind of look at the France match and go, he's not just going to stay up there and do nothing and not get a touch of the ball. That if he needs to drop in to the midfield, play a bit deeper, hold on to the ball,
he
has that.
Yeah.
And I think we should get excited. Like, maybe he doesn't end up being Erling Haaland, but he's unquestionably the best talent we have had
Here's one
in a
for you, actually.
generation.
Who's a better player?
Who's
Who's a better player outside the box to link up with other players at the moment, Ferguson or Haaland?
Haaland.
You don't like the comparison, but then you're just asking.
No,
he's actually better than Haaland. I don't like the comparison. It doesn't go far enough.
But I think
Ferguson's link-up play is very, very
Haaland's
good.
not asked to do that. I think there's been times this season when City have been at their best and he's on it, that he has no problem dropping deep, holding off players, bringing people into it.
Yeah.
But that's clearly not what
Some more
City
comments.
wanted to do.
We should really move to a 4 for tonight. We're desperate at breaking teams down with the 3-5-2, says Brian.
I generally don't like 3 at the back, and I think Ireland would be better suited. Now they played 3 at the back in my view, because Kenny, I don't remember him ever playing this in the League of Ireland. Never played 3 at the back. They played 3 at the back.
I remember you saying this is not going to happen.
I honestly couldn't see it. Obviously, then we have a coach coming in who recommends it. Also, the fact that we just looked like it suited our players better at the moment. Whether it does now or not, I don't know. I mean, you could arguably play 4 at the back right and have, say, Darragh O'Shea right back. For example, you could play, so take away the wing back situation, because I don't know what sort of form Doherty's in at the moment, and we don't have a natural left wing back that's proven at this level either. So, and I generally don't like, maybe against
it does leave us light.
James McLean not playing good football at left wing back.
I think McLean,
he's for a team that's bottom of the championship though.
Yeah, but he's having a lot of, like, he's statistically he's definitely having a very good season, and with his experience against France, to start him, quite possibly. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it was O'Dowda. Of any of the 3, Doherty, O'Dowda or McLean, I wouldn't be surprised to see any of them there. It does definitely leave us a little bit short in midfield. Like, Malumbi is energetic, a traditional Irish midfielder, gets himself about, can be a little bit reckless, doesn't seem to have curbed that massively, but he's not going to hold on to possession for you. Like, it's all on Josh Cullen to hold on to the ball. Like, everything seems to come down to him. So, like, could he throw a wild card? Could he throw a wild card in?
Well, let me throw the wild card in here. This is Gavin Cooney's probable team. So Bazunu in goals, and then you got a back 5 with Doherty and O'Dowda as the wing backs, Owen Bamadelli, Collins and O'Shea as the trio at centre back for tonight for the Latvia game. And then your midfield is Cullen, Smallbone and Knight. That's a totally different midfield trio from anybody else. Pretty interesting to see what it's like. I
definitely see Smallbone playing tonight at some stage. I think he's gonna. I think he's a really interesting player going forward. I thought he and Ferguson, actually, for the 21s, the little cameos that they had, they really looked like they had a bit of an understanding. I think he'll definitely play it. I wouldn't be amazed if he started. Like, that would be fairly wild card, but
I think.
Well, Malumbi's playing a lot of football as well, so he might think, again, with his energy. I know he talked about this team recently enough.
Tonight, somebody like Smallbone and his skill set, I think they were a little bit. They figured that it was going to take him a bit of time to acclimatise to life with the senior team, and that's why we haven't seen much of him so far.
If you did play, say if you played a 5-4-1 / Yes, say if you want to call it a 5-4-1, but Doherty and O'Dowda are the two wing backs. That does give you some sort of freedom to have 4 sort of central midfielders, 1 or 2 players off Ferguson, where we don't have natural wingers, but we have 2 players that are quite good on each wing. O'Dowda is effectively a winger, and then you will have an overload in midfield at times. That'll be interesting, that we actually do have numbers in midfield. I find with sort of the 3-5-2 that we're overrunning midfield a lot. It's when we lose the ball, and I found this a lot during Kenny's reign, we lose the ball against good teams, we're so open straight away. And I think if you play sort of a 5-4-1, which is maintaining the 3 at the back, that would offset that to a degree. That's why tonight is fascinating. It's like, and I can you, and this is the mad thing, Nathan, compare this to like the almost lethargy you had going to Ireland games back in the day, where like you had to get yourself up and go along to these crappy friendlies. Tonight I'm really excited by this game. My brother's coming up from Galway. Like, I bought tickets for the 2 games. He's like, I want to go to both games. Another guy I asked to bring the games, like, I really want to see Evan Ferguson make his debut. And there's a really good atmosphere at these games. There really is.
Yeah, like I always feel when we sit here the day of the first match that you can predict, like, this day next week, Ger, you'll be having a full
crisis
breakdown on. You'll have the head of St. Kevin's boys in wondering we're not developing players the way we once did, and that entire conversation will be happening. But there has been such a revisionism of how things were before. And I remember at the Armenia game, watching back the last time Ireland played Armenia in 2011 under Trapp, like, Ireland had a far greater quality of player. I think it was about 25,000 at it. There was no atmosphere. Ireland scraped a 2-1 victory. There's this sense that before everything, like, there is a definite. It will be when Kenny eventually goes. Be interesting to see if that interest level is maintained.
I don't think people have forgotten how bad the friendly.
I think a lot of people have
football with Trapp and O'Neill. I think a lot of people stopped going, and the attendance figures. Like, we qualified for those tournaments and we did well with O'Neill at that tournament, and that was a great moment for the team. But it turns out we weren't building something sustainable at senior international level at that point. And it does feel like the players coming through are of a significantly higher standard, and there are more of them coming through, and they're more equipped to play modern football at the moment, which clearly is an indication of the last 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of development work have been good, if not great, right? I'm not saying that there aren't problems. There clearly are, and we talk about them with Vinny regularly here. You know, he makes the point that if he had a kid who was going to make it, he'd move to England at this stage. Like, and that can't be a long-term solution for us. But I don't think people have forgotten how bad the football was. I don't think people have forgotten that we were sending up the centre backs to try and equalise for us in the last few minutes. And sure, that happened a bit under Kenny at the start.
It has, yeah.
But Shane Duffy.
Yeah, but to be fair,
I think the jury's still out on a lot of that. That, listen, it was the style of football under Trapattoni and maybe at times under O'Neill. But yes, there's good quality young players coming through. But like, is Jason Malumbi a better player than Glenn Whelan? I'm not quite sure he is. Is he a better player than Keith Andrews? I don't know. Like, a lot of these guys are still at championship level. We're hoping that they can make the step up.
I'm actually talking about the younger players even still. Like, for the first time in a long time, we feel like there's a trend.
Look at the 17s, the 19s, the 21s. Like, look at the difference of the 21s since Kenny took over and the lads who have come in since. The 21s was almost like a means to get lads capped and get them into the system. And it was a joke before Kenny came in. It really was.
I remember commentating on a game down in Waterford where I think the great Declan Rice was playing in the middle of midfield, and it was basically a load of English lads that they were trying to keep involved and keep interested.
And you look like, say, like the under 15s team, what did they win, 6-0 last night, like against Latvia. If you look all the way up now, and whatever happens with Stephen Kenny in this reign, and I think we're far too hung up about Stephen Kenny, the progress that the underage teams are making and the style of football, I don't think Irish football fans and their sort of, you know, their knowledge of the game, their appreciation of football should be underestimated. People were really pissed off in general with the way we were playing, and I totally lost interest compared to my interest in the old team, because I hated watching Ireland play, and I was embarrassed to be associated. If you were an Irish football fan, Irish football is now pigeonholed across the world and across Europe as a horrible style of football, and we're slowly moving away from that.
Quick comments. I think most Premier League teams are happy to have Coleman have the ball. They know there's a slim chance of anything coming from it, that they use the space he leaves for the counter, says Quirky 1980.
I don't think watching him the last while it's been teams letting him have the ball. I think it's his availability in the final third
high
for
energy,
his teammates that he's bringing that.
Killian Murphy says Bamadelli right wing back for France, Doherty on the left, Egan Collins and O'Shea in the centre. Could Andrew?
I wouldn't. He's plenty quick enough to do it. But again, has he ever played there?
I don't know. I mean, are one of those centre backs an actual midfielder in waiting, the new Paul McGrath who steps forward? Like, could Nathan Collins be a central midfielder for us?
I thought Darragh O'Shea could absolutely play centre midfield, and I don't think you shouldn't say, oh, this lad is centre back for sure. A lot of these players be more than capable of playing, and they're also coached to be able to pass the ball.
Yeah. Frank says 130 quid for the rugby is shocking, more so if you live outside Dublin with the extra cost involved. A couple more Fergusons in the FA won't be long raising their ticket prices, says Danny Mac1, who's obviously feeling the cynicism instead of the love today. Danny, come on, Danny, feel the love. Come on, you can do it. Budge says Netherlands are way better than us, guys. Can't just expect to beat them. Football's definitely not our game, unfortunately. France and Netherlands could do a number on us.
I don't think it's football isn't our game, but I think
football isn't our game.
When we're talking about getting something, like, again, it's somehow the French end up in complete disarray by the time they get here on Monday for us to get something out of it.
We kind of need a little bit of that.
We do. Like, look, we could have a Germany Shane Long moment, and that it's kickstarts something, and they move on from there, and they go and win in Greece.
I think you're like
they could also beat us 3-0, and we could play as well as we can, and that would be.
But that's why I say when you're sitting here next Tuesday, Wednesday, there's different ways of.
Did the Champions League experience of Antoine Griezmann and the World Cup winning squad of France, and then the World Cup beaten in the final.
We're in crisis mode. We might have to play Camavinga at left back. Oh, one of the best young midfielders in the world who's just destroyed Liverpool in recent weeks. Fine, let's stick him in at left back.
I've forgotten about Camavinga. Aren't we so lucky as a small country to be able to celebrate Ferguson breaking through, the Rugby World Cup, Katie's homecoming, GA, and so much more? What a year ahead of us, says Quirky 1980, who is feeling the love this morning. Right.
Isn't it weird how proud you are of young Irish players? Like, watching Evan Ferguson on the Sunday, and like, you'd swear he was my own son. I'm like, oh, what a guy! And then he does his interview and he speaks well. You're like, ah.
And your son standing there with the ball and, Daddy, come out and play football. Like, no, I have to watch Ferguson. no, I'm not doing it. No, just
you're like this guy.
Why can't you do this?
Oh, he's going back at me. He goes, he's so good because his dad was a really good footballer. What have you offered me?
I'm just waiting for Erling Haaland to be asked, like, how do you compare to Evan Ferguson?
Look,
Erling. I see Erling has a little groin injury and
I saw
unavailable
that,
for Norway.
Fatherhood Inc.
other groin injuries are available.
Big ones. It's a minute past 8. If you want to get in touch this morning, 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Of course, you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream. And McNulty's going to join us in studio to talk about his book a little bit later on. We've got Cian Tracey talking about the best team of the Six Nations. He's going to pick a team of the Six Nations. We were obviously the best team of the Six Nations. Although France are feeling it. That was good information from Matt Williams about how they didn't taper off their training for the early stages of the tournament, and they were stressing the team on purpose. That's an interesting little wrinkle to the whole thing. I was like, oh, okay, that makes a bit of sense.
You guys need to know what losing feels like.
Yeah. And then they've got every game at home for the rest of it, because Scotland didn't vote for us to host the World Cup.
Brought that up a few times now.
Well, it would explain.
You're going to be like Frano, that this is that when the players are going on the pitch over Murrayfield, this was part of their thought process.
Well, it would explain Andy Dunn's. He's like, oh yeah, because we keep forgetting, like, the Scots. We always beat them. Why would we care about them? Because they stabbed us in the front, they stabbed us in the back. We were like, it was slashed. Anyway, we got sidetracked there.
What would tickets be like for a World Cup in Dublin in rugby?
What would tickets be like? They would be 250 quid. Tickets for the Rugby World Cup are set by the Rugby World Cup organisation, who are like a money hoover.
What are they? I'm not going to even speculate, but I'd imagine you're looking 100 quid for the cheapest ticket.
For the Rugby World Cup?
Yeah.
Oh, geez, I don't think so. I think it's more than that.
Wow.
I haven't. I think you'd be lucky to get one for 80 quid, I'd say. The Rugby World Cup is just a gouge. Give us the money. Give us all the money. Because so many of the teams don't make any money, like the All Blacks and Rugby Australia. Like, the Lions keep them afloat, and then the World Cup gives them extra. And that's anyway. Right, we have Tommy Rooney standing by, who's going to do this week's episode of the Football Power Rankings. Just one quick mention: Katie McCabe last night picked a midfield but moves to left back whenever Bayern make their subs. Has a goal line clearance, keeps Arsenal in the tie, even though they were, I think, pretty good. Arsenal had 25 shots. They're 1-0 down after the game against Bayern in the quarterfinal of the Champions League, so it's evenly poised for the return in the second leg. And Arsenal haven't been in the Champions League semi-final since 2013. After the break, Tommy Rooney's latest Football Power Rankings.
OTB AM.
The Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. OTB GAA.
You don't just have a speech the Wednesday before a game. You go out and you rile up your team and go out and play the match with fire and brimstone. Now you analyse teams to death.
Lee Chin gave an exhibition yesterday. He ghosted around that field. Cork actually couldn't get a handle on him.
Subscribe to the OTB GAA podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.
Some of these critics, these pundits.
Generally speaking, I'd be a fan of Off the Ball. Exactly. And like Tommy knows football, obviously I listen to football pod the odd time. And
when I was looking at the power rankings and I thought that Jesus Owen must still be feeling the effects of these mushrooms.
They just dismiss you like you know you have nothing to do with the bloody occasion.
No mushrooms today, Tommy Rooney. Good morning to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Not today, Ger. Good morning. How are you? Hi, Johnny.
Very well.
Thanks.
No controversies this week. Although we should. RTE have had to fire back at the Louth lads, saying that there's no conspiracy against them, and that there was just an administrative issue that prevented them from being there for the historic Louth surge. RTE last night denied claims their lack of coverage of high-flying Louth's Division 2 campaign is related to a long-running dispute with Mickey Hart. Gavin Devlin, Hart's right-hand man in Louth, believes the issue is down to an historic disagreement with Hart and urged RTE to see it through a Louth lens. He understands why leading figures in the county are annoyed that Louth are the only side in Division 2 not to have received any RTE television coverage this spring. Louth go to Croke Park on Sunday to face Dublin. Obviously they'll get that one, you know. So let's get to, because Louth I think are one of the big risers this week, right?
They're one of the big risers, and for the people allowed, they can be happy to know that Paddy Andrews took a stand for them this week. He's sick of not having any Louth footage to go off, so he is going to Croke Park.
Oh, hi Bailey. What does Bailey think of...
This is Bailey's time for a walk in the morning, Ger, so I might be in a little bit of bother on here this morning.
What age is Bailey, actually?
Bailey's just over 2, Johnny.
It'll be
so
good,
he's,
she or she?
It's a he. He's got the loveliest eyelashes in the world as well. They're about 2 foot long.
I'm looking forward to when he's like getting on a bit and you can call him Old Bailey, you know.
Hey.
Oh, I can't wait for that as well. Was
that on purpose? Is there like a legal thing? Rumpole. There's a reference. Right.
I got it. Don't be saying I didn't get that. I got that. I'm just trying to get somebody to get the dog.
It wasn't so much. Okay. It wasn't so much you as our audience are all like, oh my god. But it was when I was growing up, we had 2 channels and everything was on repeat. So I'm very familiar with stuff from like the 50s and 60s of BBC that RT were always getting for nothing, that were like just on heavy duty repeat. And like, well, this looks very old, but like seems to just about be in colour.
One of my earliest memories is like Liverpool v Crewe in a cup game, and I found it on YouTube where like it was the way it was the worst. Like BBC was just coming in, you could vaguely see it, and Liverpool won like 4-0 in those old green Carlsberg jerseys. But like we had 2 channels, we literally had 2 channels,
yeah,
including the national anthem and
the end of the night.
Religious thing they had at the end of the night.
A prayer before bedtime. Right, let's get going.
There are a fair few changes here, lads. So yeah, we'll get into it. I'll run you through them really quickly. So are we on slide 4?
We are on slide 4.
Okay, so the Waterford footballers got their first win in over 600 days at the weekend. Went under the radar a little. They bet London by 2-9 to 2-5. They did incredibly well. Had a black card and conceded a penalty, I think, in the first half. So Aoife Fitzgerald and Waterford, fair play. Big thing to get that first win off the back. So they've now replaced London and they've moved into 31st place. Their first move in the power rankings, I would imagine, in a long time, even under the stewardship of Owen Sheehan. Tipperary have continued to slide back there in 27th place. Relegation was confirmed at the weekend with defeat to Offaly. Wicklow are up 1 to 26th. Despite another late draw, Wicklow still have a great shot at promotion. And if they beat Waterford and Sligo beat Leitrim, Oisin McConville would have secured promotion as first year's manager. So big move for Wicklow. Laois lost to Leitrim. They've slipped back 1, and it could have been so simple if they'd beaten them. If they'd held on and beaten them, they would have promotion in their own hands. Likewise at Wicklow, if they had held off Wexford and beaten them by a point, they would have promotion in their own hands. They're pipped at the death by Leitrim, and now they need a win against London, plus a Sligo defeat, and hope that Wicklow don't catch them on score difference. That's how Division 4 is looking. The other 2, when we get on to the next slide, we've got Leitrim in 24th position. They're up to another brilliant win. They held off Laois at home. They had a habit over the last couple of weeks of taking a lead in the middle of the second half and just falling away in the last 15 minutes. This time they went 5 up with 15 minutes to go and they won by 2. So good signs in Leitrim, and they're in a do-or-die clash at home once more against a tabletop in Sligo. I would argue that Carrick and Shannon, again, it's not being televised, so loud fans, it can be emphasised, but I would argue that Carrick and Shannon is the only place to be this Sunday at 1 o'clock.
What stamp is he putting on the team?
So we've had very little footage to go off, Johnny, but I can tell you that I had a look at some of the Wicklow game, and they play a very direct style. They've got a superstar with Keith Byrne there, and Keith Byrne was named in the team of the week 4 weeks in a row. They're not afraid to go direct to Byrne. Against Laois in the last couple of minutes when Laois were on the attack, Byrne won 2 unbelievable marks, kicked 2 huge scores in the last couple of minutes. They have a clutch forward there. They're a very valuable commodity in every division in Gaelic football. But if you've got somebody who can put the ball over the bar in Division 4 and you know how to get the best out of them, you're going to do well. And Leitrim are doing that with Keith Byrne. They've got a really athletic middle third, which is really important. And yeah, they play a fairly direct style of football. Some of the scores in that Wicklow game, like Paul Keeney scored a point from 55 yards with the outside of the right boot. He wasn't afraid to take the shot.
That Andy would have been proud of.
I'm not sure if Andy Moran would have even taken that shot on, but Keeney took it on. And a few minutes later, the wing back, I can't remember exactly who had the ball, drove a 50-yard ball into Keith Byrne, who skinned the full back, dummied the goalkeeper and put it in the back of the net. Now Wicklow came back and beat them, but they're obviously playing with a bit of freedom, bit of abandon, bit of confidence, and I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing them this weekend. I'm hoping to get up to the game on Sunday.
Let's keep going, come on.
So Sligo 23rd, Antrim, one of the results of the weekend, they bet Cavan. They secured their position in Division 3. Armagh fans, don't sleep on Antrim. They've been quietly one of the most improved teams in the division this year. They had a poor year last year. They've bounced back this year. They've lost 2 games in injury time, but they're safe. Leitrim have slid back to 21st. It's been a really... They've slid back Limerick. 3 points, actually.
Sorry, yeah, Limerick, yeah.
Limerick, sorry. It's been a really tough 2023 so far. Relegation confirmed at the weekend as they failed to turn over Kildare after they bombed out the manager, so they didn't get the manager bounce that they were hoping for. Down have slid back 1. Down have been really unlucky. I tipped them at the start of the year to go up. They've preserved their 100% home record with another win, but a costly late defeat to Fermanagh means that they cannot secure promotion on the last day because of the head-to-head rule. They need to reach the Ulster final this year to compete for Sam, and they've got Donegal in that Ulster quarter-final, which I'm saying to keep an eye on, and I've said that from January. Offaly are up 2 places. Offaly ended an incredibly difficult week last week after the passing of their manager Liam Kearns by beating Tipperary and leaving themselves in with a really good shot of promotion in the final day against Down. They're up against Down in the last game. Fermanagh in 18th place, one of the stories of the league, 5 wins and a defeat. Another win at the weekend. They held off Westmeath, who have been really disappointing in the league, you'd have to say. And now they have to beat Cavan on the final day to go up. So for Fermanagh, it's simple. You beat Cavan, who are already promoted and may have an eye on the league final already. You beat Cavan and you go up. But if Fermanagh lose to Cavan and Offaly beat Down, Offaly will join Cavan in Division 2 next year. Cavan have slid back 2 places to -2. They were 10 points down at the weekend to Antrim. They came back and lost by 1. Maybe they already have an eye on Ulster in the league final. It's looking like they may have to reach the league final to get to Sam unless Westmeath get to the Leinster final, and then that position becomes free. It is still quite a complicated system. We'll know about 9 teams that are in Sam Maguire.
Yeah, the Ulster final, yeah. Go on.
The weekend. So, Kildare, after quite a slide over the last couple of weeks, I am giving them their kudos. They got their 3 goals, their first 3 goals of the league. They're into 16th place. They got the job done on Limerick. It was not convincing, but they got the job done. And beating Meath next week, I would argue, is important for a couple of reasons. It's important for your positioning in Division 2, and if Kildare don't want to play in Sam Maguire, and I put it to James O'Donoghue and Paddy Anderson, the football pod last night, would it be a good thing for teams like Meath and Kildare to compete in Sam? Well, should they actually compete there? The lads actually felt that the profile of the Meath team meant, I think the average age I'd put to them is around 24, meant that maybe Sam Maguire or Tatchin Cup could be a good right thing for Meath, because they were so naive, and there is clearly talent there, but for the Kildare players and fellas that are stock of Daniel Flynn, Kevin Flynn,
Kerwin,
Kevin Feely, Dara Kerwin,
Highland.
Players that are a little bit older, that are a little bit more settled, they need to be competing in Sam Maguire and showing what they're about. So Kildare in 16th place, and that's a big game next weekend against
I think I might be in full agreement with Bailey that Meath are getting a bit of a soft ride here after their performance last weekend. I don't know if
we'll get to that in a second. Westmeath have slid back 2 places. Promotion's out of reach. They will compete in SAM. It's been a very weird league. They've scored 13 goals. They've conceded 1. I had them in for promotion with Cavan. Yeah, it's been a bit of a letdown now, Westmeath.
Westmeath have let the air come out of the balloon, because everybody talks about the scenes last year when they won the Tailteann Cup, and then obviously some of their club teams went deep, and you thought, okay, this is the rising tide, and Division 2 football is next. Have a season in Division 2 where you kind of establish yourselves, but that didn't happen. They're now an established Division 3 side, and they'll be back in the Tailteann Cup next year, almost irrespective of what happens.
100%, Ger. And it's the yo-yo continues, and that's what you're trying to break for a lot of these counties. You're trying to just reach beyond mediocrity and get a bit of momentum behind you, and we'll get to a team now that have done it remarkably well since 2021 in Louth. But Westmeath back to 15th. I can't see them getting much higher than that. I got a lot of stick for having them quite high early on, but that's where I felt they deserved to be at the start of the season. So,
and they let you down.
Come at me. In 14th place, this hurt, but I do actually think it's fair. Meath are in 14th place. I actually couldn't move them any further. And it just shows the stock of teams around this position. There are a lot of teams that aren't playing well at the minute. And what did you expect at the weekend? You probably expected Meath to have a better structure. It was actually alarming how easy they made it for Dublin. It was such a disappointment. Colin O'Rourke spoke about it last July, that beating Dublin as a Meath footballer is still the litmus test, you could say. He doubled down on it in the Tommy Tiernan show in February and said that man-to-man battles, could you go and play against them? That was the big thing. And it just seems like Meath are set up to fail at the weekend.
Where is Colin O'Rourke at the moment?
Colin O'Rourke is at... Colin O'Rourke is there's a really good team around Colin O'Rourke, and Stephen Bray, Barry Callaghan, Paul Garrigan and Shane Wall. I feel like they need to look at the Derry defeat. They need to look at the Dublin defeat. Take the positives and the negatives from the league. It's very early on, but they need to possibly set up the way they did in the second half, which is much more secure, but it was far too late. I feel like there is a bit of a... There's a full back line there, 2 21-year-olds and a 27-year-old, all in their first year playing intercounty football.
And did they not fall out with the best fullback in the country, who apparently is down in Australia?
I don't know if there was a fallout there. I have to do a bit of digging on that, but it is fair to say that Conor McGill was one of the
club player of the year,
strongest club player of the year in Meath. He was the captain who retold the club championship, the club champions. One of the strongest footballers, you could say, in the Meath, in the county. You could say that conditioning, some people were saying, was an issue against the Dubs. I tell you one thing, Conor McGill would have no problem with conditioning. He's one of the most athletic fullbacks in the country. I can't tell you what happened. I don't know what happened there. Well, I don't know why he's not in the squad. But you're missing fellas like McGill. Brian Menton wasn't convinced to come back, as far as I know. And he's another player who is a real leader and a rock in the middle of that team. You would have heard me argue for years under Andy McNulty that Meath were better than they were given credit for, and they were coming up against the greatest Dublin team of all time. And I felt like Meath deserved a bit more credit for how they were getting on, and they weren't far off. They were trying a system. Now that hit its peak and it slid backwards, but the complete spine of what McEntee had done has been completely ripped out. And I've been saying since the start under O'Rourke that a marriage of styles is needed. I do think that the players, there's a very young core of players coming through. They're very, 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 very talented. They do need a bit of they do need to be allowed to express themselves and play with a bit of freedom. But the complete spine has been written out of what Meath have done for 6 years, and I don't think that should have been done.
O'Rourke is in danger of becoming Gary Neville at Valencia. That's what is happening at the moment, and so he needs to get a grip of the situation really quickly and decide what they want to be. Do they want to play modern football that's ready for the challenges of Division 2? Bear in mind, this is Division 2 we're talking about, where they're getting hockeyed in games, and we'll see come Championship what happens, but it's careering off path quickly. And look,
I'm going to put on the record before the clip goes out. You said Gary Neville, not me. Just before this clips up and my name gets put to it, you said Gary Neville, not me. But I would say that management team have to be good enough to recognise the lessons that they've learned so far, and they've got to be able to turn this around.
To be fair, it is a management team.
Rourke has to, you look at the way the Loud players talk about Mickey Hart. It's not just Mickey Hart. They talk about Gavin Devlin, Horse they call him, being, and they believe, the best coach in the country. And James O'Donoghue said on the pod this week, it doesn't matter if he's the best coach or not. All that matters is that you believe it. And it's such a powerful thing when a group of players and a management team are all moving in the same direction. And I have to say for me,
that's the placebo effect.
Very early. It's very early. It's very early, Ger.
Okay,
Division 2,
okay.
It's up and down.
Could be too late.
And I think it's fair that Meath are 14th. I don't think Meath should be any worse.
Well, I think if Kildare beat them this weekend, they should definitely be behind them. Like, they fluked a draw against Limerick, who are like not even on the same sheet as them.
They probably should have beaten Limerick, to be honest. I watched that game back. They should have beaten Limerick. And Limerick were buoyed, I would imagine, by the fact that as a team, as a group, powerfully they had decided to get rid of Ray Dempsey. But
he was still in charge for that game, wasn't he?
Yeah, but I would say that the meeting had already happened for the Limerick players, and I think there's a bit of freedom there for Limerick. So
interesting take.
Okay.
That was, I think they got their manager bounced before Kildare came.
They are gymnastics. That is Nadia Comaneci, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay.
Perfect
gymnastics. 10. Okay, but I do think Meath are 14th in the country, and I actually think if they get into the Tailteann Cup, they deserve to be in the Tailteann Cup, and they may fall there even if they beat Kildare, because if Cork beat Derry, Cork will get 4th place, and that should be enough.
Luckily, the game's in Newbridge from Meath's perspective, and Kildare's record there is horrific at the moment. Let's move on, because there's actually Division 1 that we should be talking about.
Exactly, and it's a sorry argument to be getting into about who's going to win between Meath and Kildare, because they're just
two ball men fighting over a comb, as my ma would say.
But I'm going to say the Meath under 20s had a big win last night. They held off Longford in difficult conditions, and they've struggled against Longford. So there is hope in Meath, because there are young footballers coming through, but it's just something has to be tweaked over what's happened. Lessons have to be learned.
Let's move on to the teams.
13th place, Clare. People are going to say I should have Clare lower, and I probably should, but I talk about Meath being lucky, and they probably are the luckiest team in Division 3. They should be in Division 2. They should be in a relegation battle this weekend. If they had drawn to Limerick, if they hadn't turned over Cork in that last 15 minutes in the first game, and we saw what Cork have done since, Clare should have a shot at staying up, but you make your own luck in many ways, and they've completely run out of steam in the last couple of weeks. They have one last hope to stay in Sam Maguire, and when you argue with the profile of a team, I think this Clare team fancy themselves as a side who would have a crack in an All-Ireland series and a round-robin series. They got to the last 8 last year, but they're in Division 3 next year, so that's where they're at, and they're going to have to bounce back from a tough position. They've had 8 years in Division 2. It's the first relegation under Colin Collins, but 2 defeats to Kildare and Dublin by a point in round 3 and 4 were key. So Cork in Munster, quarter-final, April 9th. I'm telling you, that's another game to keep an eye on. Championship games are coming thick and fast, and that is going to be a cracker in the Munster quarter-final. So 12th position, the moment Louth fans have been waiting for. I was reminded last night, lads, that I actually gave Louth an outside shot at Leinster last year. So I'm just putting that out there. That I give them an outside shot at Leinster. So I don't deserve all the stick I've been getting for having Louth where they were. I'll be honest, I didn't fully believe that they would be able to do what they've done this year. And that is credit to what Mickey Hart and Gavin Devlin have done, and to what that group of players have done, because they are missing their 2 marquee men.
Yeah.
They're missing Kieran Byrne, who played professional football for 6 years, and I can imagine sets so many standards around that group, and maintains them, and it's so important to have around the place. And they're missing Samuel Roy, their talisman, who is out with a hamstring injury. They're missing 2 or 3 others. Like, I watched them against Clare. They had 3 first half injury enforced substitutions that day. Same against Meath. They had 3 first half injury enforced substitutions. They're down to the tin bones of their panel, and they are operating like it doesn't matter. And the manner in which they're set up, like, they're crying, like, the likes of Meath and Kildare are crying out to have a setup the way they allowed to have. Like, last year they conceded every kick out, and this year they've got a full court press with their goalkeeper winning kickouts in midfield. They just believe in what they're doing, and it's such a powerful thing. And they are rightfully, I'm going to say it right now, I didn't say it last week because I actually thought Cork would turn them over and it would save me a couple of weeks. I wanted to wait until the Leinster quarter-final until they face Westmeath. Louth are the second best team in Leinster at the minute. I don't think it's the greatest, trophy to be winning, but they deserve to be there, and they've earned it, because they've gone from Division 4 in 2021 to being on the verge of making it to Division 1 in 2023. And Dublin had it all their own way last week against Meath. And I hope it filled them with a false sense of security, because there is no hope in hell that Louth are going to give it to them their own way in Croke Park this weekend.
You'd much rather be Louth than Kildare or Meath at the moment, so I don't think it's that controversial, and Westmeath as well after the league campaign. So, okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, so Louth are in 12th position. Cork are in 11th. They lost at the weekend. I would argue that Cork, again, luck comes into it, but Cork were unlucky at the weekend. They were in a very commanding position against Louth. Conceded a penalty before half-time. It was missed. Rebound was scored. They had a man sent off. Louth got the benefit of playing against 14 men for the entire second half for the second or third week in a row, and that in Gaelic football is a big thing. Donegal are in 10th position. We know what's going on in Donegal. Not worth talking about there, going back into it. Monaghan are in 9th. I think they're going to join Donegal in Division 2 next year. Roscommon have slipped back one more, even though they put on a decent showing against Kerry. It's a wee slide, but they can still reach the league final, albeit it's a long shot if results go their way and they beat Donegal. Might be worth talking about these two. Tyrone are up one place. I've been impressed with how they've bounced back after that limp defeat to Castlebar. I was at that game against Mayo, and it was alarming, the systems malfunction that had unfolded in front of us. But it's a very interesting game against Armagh next week, and we'll get a good gauge of where both Armagh and Tyrone are really at, because Tyrone have bounced back. Armagh, it's like, I don't think Armagh are far away, and I can really understand why they've done what they've done. I know people are probably frustrated with it. We all loved Armagh last year. I talked Armagh up plenty. We loved the way they played football. There was a box office rockstar element to it. And I think they sat down and they looked at what happened against Galway and in a lot of their other games, and they were far too reliant on emerging out of the chaos, the right side of it. And maybe they want to bring a bit more control into what they're doing. And that's what they've tried to do. They've set up a lot more defensively. They've become a lot more conservative with the ball. James and Paddy are begging them to let loose this weekend and show us that they still have what they had last year, because that is what made Armagh special. I think we will see it, because Armagh are in danger of going down if Monaghan manage to turn over Mayo. And I know Shane describes Monaghan as the cockroach of the Division 1, and it's a fair moniker. I don't think that's going to happen this week. I think Armagh will be safe either way, but I do think Armagh are going to throw the shackles off, and we've mentioned it before, momentum. When the championship is so close and they've got Antrim coming up, Armagh need a performance and a result this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they're doing a heavy block of training and they're not tapering for these games and they don't give a shite about the league. And that's a totally fair way to go about things. But I think we were chatting about this earlier on in the week. It's a long era that we've had with Geezer there, and a national trophy at the end of that to say this is progress. Like, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if they limp out of Ulster and then we see something brilliant from them in the round robin. That's not a million miles away from how Geezer has, like, traditionally over the 14 years of his managerial career. That's how the season has worked out for them. Okay, let's keep going.
It could happen. Well, it's worth hanging on this point for a second.
So I think Tyrone are back, by the way. I mean, I was getting absolutely hammered last season when I was like, oh, this Tyrone team, they're not the shit All-Ireland champions that everybody says they are. They're actually really good. They've got a spine of brilliant players, and no, this is the worst All-Ireland final I've ever seen. They're the worst team since Cork 2010 to win. And then it was like, you go back and you watch those Cork Kerry games, and that Cork team were amazing, who were very unfortunate not to win more than that. So I don't know. I think
sorry, I totally agree with you that they were full value for their All-Ireland win.
Tyrone are back.
But no, hold on, let's not discount last year. Last year they tanked. Like that was one of the poorest All-Ireland defences we've seen in a long time. And it can happen. And let's park that. Are they back? They're showing signs. And I do think that one of the positives, and I'm not sure if you've seen much from Ger, but Darragh Canavan is starting to grab the bull by the horns, and Rory is getting a couple of minutes every game. And I think that the two of them are going to have a big influence over them this year. And some of the younger lads like Cormac Quinn are starting to solidify themselves and put a bit of energy back into this Tyrone team. So
maybe they were a season ahead. You win nothing with kids, but this year they're not kids anymore. So, okay, very quickly.
Okay, Derry are 5th, Dublin are 4th, Mayo are 3rd, Galway are 2nd, Kerry are 1st. We can have an argument here if you want, right? But what you said there about Armagh, the training block, was interesting. I put it to James every week now, are you worried about Kerry? Are you worried about Kerry? No, Kerry are flat, nothing to worry about. James says, big training block coming up now. That's what Kerry are focused on. They're not playing, they're going to play Tipper Waterford in the 3rd week of April. The Dubs, I think, are out the 3rd week of April as well. Maybe it's not the worst thing, and I'm not saying they're going to do it or it's going to happen, but if Armagh were to lose to Antrim, they would have a month, minimum, 5-6 weeks, until they're in the All-Ireland round robin series, and then they're guaranteed 3 games. That's the way the setup is this year. it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for an Ulster side who are guaranteed to play in Sam to lose early doors and get their training block in like in previous years. It might be the most straightforward way for a team to get conditioned properly, because the calendar is so insane this year. It's so hard to know exactly where teams are at, especially the teams that are expecting to be in the latter end of the championship.
I hadn't thought about that from a Mayo perspective. Maybe that's the right thing for them to do as well. Because they can win a gazillion games to get to an All-Ireland semi-final or final and then find themselves completely depleted. Or they can lose in the first round of the Connacht Championship and have a month off.
And that is a very good comparison, because the way I looked at this earlier in the year, I think Armagh could win the All-Ireland this year in 13 games because they're playing in the preliminary round in Ulster. Galway, who are already in the Connacht semi-final, could do it in 8. That's the way it is. If they go clean through. If Armagh go the back door, or if they go clean through Ulster, it's 13 games.
Ulster says no. Ulster says no to a fair championship. Ulster says no, they don't want Proposal B. Ulster says no, screw you. We need to punish our teams for playing all these games in Ulster. What were they thinking? Yeah. Anyway.
And it's the exact same for a Clare or a Limerick, who are now in Division 3 and looking at the Tailteann Cup, the same way that Cavan down for Mana, who all have had a bit of momentum. Clare and Limerick, is going the other way, but Clare and Limerick only need to win. Clare need to beat Cork and then beat Limerick to get to a Munster final and retain their place in Sam. Cavan or Fermanagh are on a much tougher proposition.
More of that goodness, of course, on the football pod with Tommy and Paddy and James. Tommy, good stuff. Non-contentious power rankings. Thanks very much. That's this week's episode. And Bailey.
Tommy knows his football, obviously. Listen to football pod the odd time.
And I was looking at the power rankings and I thought that Jesus, Owen must still be feeling the effects of these mushrooms.
Poor Owen wasn't even involved. Right, up next, Cian Tracey is going to join us in studio to pick his Six Nations team of the tournament. First, Brian O'Driscoll chatting with Joe last night. The full podcast is exclusively available on the Off the Ball Podcast Network.
They haven't left that many things before a World Cup to deliver, to give themselves the best shot. But until we do go and do it in a World Cup, we'll always be that but team.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it. And people have every right to shoot us down as someone that, peaks between World Cups and so on. You still have to get it done at the time that it really counts, which we have not managed to do.
Steve Hansen did just this week.
I saw that.
I had this kind of reflex to go, well, hang on a minute. And then, okay.
They're right. They are right. And I unfortunately, I have to live that as, someone that was involved in 4 of them. And, it does, you look back and reflect on your career, you do think of the great days, but you also think about what you missed, what you didn't get done, and what others have managed to do, and you don't have one of them. And so a World Cup medal, of course, but we weren't World Cup winning standard. We never were in those 4 World Cups. No. We could have gotten to a semi-final, but we were never going to win it. Whereas, being confident this time round, it's the first time that you could genuinely say that there's a chance, with lots going right for us, that we could be World Cup champions. But
yeah, the big but. We have plenty of months to think about that. That was Brian O'Driscoll last night. The full podcast is available, as I said, exclusively in the OTB Rugby feed, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent is with us. Cian, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, lads. How are we?
The dust is beginning to settle on Ireland's Six Nations triumph.
Slightly.
Yeah.
I think we can get another few days out of it.
I think so too. I mean, the country's going a bit mad, but sure, why wouldn't we? There's definitely 2 sides to the going mad thing. It's like, oh, we've gone too far. I felt a little bit like we've gone too far in the build up to the England game, where people were like just arriving to celebrate the victory before the match was played. But now that it's happened, go mad.
If you're not going to enjoy winning a Grand Slam, I mean, it's only been done 4 times in the history, never been done in Dublin. So yeah, even if you touch in the 20s, winning the Grand Slam 24 hours later, these are special days for Irish rugby. I think everyone knows that the biggest challenge is ahead later this year, but that can come, like you mentioned there, it's very important. I think the players are conscious of that. I remember speaking to James Ryan in about 2019, and he said that Rob Kearney said to them in the dressing room after they won it in 2018, to particularly himself and Andrew Porter, who'd only just broken onto the scene, it won't always be like this. And sure enough, it hasn't been. So I think there's an element of, enjoying it, and from what I hear, the players certainly enjoyed themselves over the weekend and fully deserved. But it's mad to think, like, on Saturday week now you're going to have Leinster and Munster knocking lumps out of each other in the Champions Cup round of 16, and it all goes back to normal before we build back up again in the summer. But what a weekend for Irish rugby. Yeah, and look, there's loads of other bits and pieces that we can get into. We did ask you to pick your Six Nations 2023 team. Did all of the players who were nominated, I'm just trying to do a quick toss for the player of the tournament, didn't make it? All right. No.
Controversial. Who's out?
Well, Thomas Ramos isn't at full back for starters. Hugo Keenan, I think, is, for me, nailed on. One of the first names on the team sheet. I'm looking here now to remember who I picked again.
I've got it for you if you need. So you've gone. We'll start with number 9, which has to be Dupont, who is So this. I hadn't realised this, but maybe everybody knew this, but Matt Williams was on yesterday saying that France were delighted because they had a really hard training block through the early stage, and they hadn't periodised the training to peak for the games. They were like, no, we're going to stress them, we're going to put you out on your feet, we're going to see how you deal with it. It's like, oh, okay.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think that was definitely the word doing the rounds, and then I think the performance in Twickenham, you saw like kind of how they were. Yeah, exactly. And like, my sense of how France were kind of ticking along was they won a Grand Slam last year, not playing the best rugby, you'd have to say, definitely not playing typical French rugby. And while that's grand when you're winning, I was kind of going, wow, okay, if this starts to fall apart a little bit come the World Cup, if there's any supporters that are going to get on the back, it's the French. So the Twickenham performance, I think, was a real stark reminder of that they haven't gone away, and they're able to play the power game, they're able to play the running game. So I thought that was a huge result for France, and performance as well.
After one of the November games, we were at the Aviva and then went to the pub and watched the France-Australia game. It was one of the best games of rugby I've ever seen, because Australia were like, we've nothing to lose here, and it was just before their coach ended up getting fired, but they were running in tries from behind their goal line, and France were doing the same thing. And it was just such a high level of stuff that you were watching, and you're like, I still think France are the best team in the world. And
you do?
Yeah.
So Ireland are obviously not likely to win the World Cup.
Well, I think that the whole number 1 ranking thing is like, it's nonsensical in a team sport, really. The team who wins the World Cup is currently the best team in the world, and we haven't had a World Cup this year. And at the end of the year, we're going to have a World Cup, and the best team in the world is going to win the World Cup.
And
it's now implied that France were not at their best in Dublin, basically. They physically weren't trained to be at their best on that day.
Yeah, like they were probably at maybe 98-97%, but taking nothing away, like, that was an exceptional Irish performance. And France did turn up on the day as well. So I think the rankings are such a nonsense, really. I don't think the Irish squad really read too much into it, and you see the way the draw for the World Cup is working. It's crazy. So I know everyone knows at this stage, but you have, the top 5 teams ranked in the world, except South Africa, South Africa are on the same side, all on the same side of the draw, which is crazy, really. So you're going to have a good chance that a poor England team could get to a World Cup semi-final. Then once you get to that stage, the old cliche that anything can happen. So also that the calendars are lopsided as well. So the Six Nations will go into cold storage now. We'll have the provinces playing out. But come the summer, the Rugby Championship is going to start. And, if South Africa or the All Blacks, or even Australia, who I actually think are dark horses as well, they gave Ireland a serious game in November too. So if one of those teams lights it up in the Rugby Championship, suddenly Ireland's Grand Slam is a little bit of a distant memory, and they're coming into the World Cup on form. So there's so much road left to run before we get to the World Cup that loads can happen.
And it's a massive challenge to get us to the stage in September, October, where we were at this point. And we don't traditionally play our best rugby at that point of the season because we're not attuned to. So
but they've done it well when you think about last summer, building into November, clean sweep, building into Grand Slam, clean sweep. So hopefully they've turned a corner in that regard.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry, Dupont is 9, and it's not even up for debate, right?
No. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Sexton at 10. Was there anybody who was pushing him out?
I don't think so. Enda
Russell at times.
Finn Russell at times, but then you think of the Ireland game, and he had a couple of moments, but that was the game where you wanted to see, Finn Russell show
dominant display.
Yeah, exactly. And you didn't have that dominant display. I don't think Sexton was at his best in every game. He certainly wasn't at his best last weekend, but he's just so important to Ireland. We saw again in Rome when he didn't play. Now there was other sort of factors in that. You had a new halfback pairing, you had a centre pairing who I don't think will ever play for Ireland again together, because it just didn't work in terms of Bundyaki and Stuart McCloskey. And when Sexton isn't there, it just doesn't hum as well. So for me, he was
you say that, but by the time we get to a World Cup semi-final, we'd be like, they're the only 2 bodies left standing, lads, out you go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think the thing about Finn Russell as well is he was wearing a knee brace against Ireland, and so he'd obviously gone back and played a game for the club in between, and he wasn't the same player. and like that's
his
again
kicking had been unbelievable as well, hadn't it?
That's
like Finn Russell is great. Like is great to watch, but I mean, like if you're talking about a team in a championship, who you want there, like it's for me, it's Johnny Sexton every day. Like in terms of like entertainment and stuff, Finn Russell might pull a rabbit out of a hat.
Is he the best out half in the world still?
Johnny Sexton, I would say so. Yeah, I wouldn't take another out half in the world right now than Johnny Sexton. Like who would you say? Like Richie Mwanga, Andre Pollard. For me, Johnny Sexton every day.
Okay, so you've gone for Mac Hansen and Damien Penaud on the wings.
Yeah, I did take a bit of kind of liberty here now in moving Mac Hansen onto the left wing if we're going to be pedantic, which I usually am when I see teams like this, and then I went to get into my own golden rule. But look, Mac Hansen is the type of guy I think you could play him out half, you could play him full back, but I thought he was exceptional for Ireland. Obviously he got 2 man of the match performances, and just the energy I think he gives. Obviously he's nominated for Player of the Tournament, fully deserved as well. And James Lowe is probably a bit unlucky to miss out, but Damien Penaud, I think, outside of Dupont, is probably my favourite player in the world to watch. He's just real old school. The try he scored against Ireland was
amazing. That was one of my moments of
it was in
the noise that the French, when they just...
I think the Irish fans are making the noises as well. Maybe
it was like old rugby, it was like
exactly
Jesus.
And he is real throwback to the old days. He's just such a thrill a minute, and I thought I had to have him in my team. I thought have to make a space for him.
You've gone for a 12 and a 13 combination from Scotland and Ireland?
Yeah, so Sione Tuipulotu I thought was one of the big success stories, I have to say, of Scotland's Six Nations campaign. I think a lot of their success was predicated on the fact that, in a similar way that Ireland aren't as reliant on Johnny Sexton, Gregor Townsend has sort of built attack that it all goes through Finn Russell. But when you have a playmaker like Tuipulotu outside of him, I think it made the Scottish attack less predictable, and I thought he was really, really impressive. Gary Ringrose, some people might say that's a bit controversial because obviously he didn't play in 2 of the games. He was injured in Rome. He was injured last weekend, but my God, when he did play, he just reminded us, I think, of why he is, for me, probably the best 13 in the world at the moment. It was really disappointing that he didn't get a chance, to feature in the Grand Slam. I thought it was really telling that, after he had that horrible injury, which was probably the lowest point, I think, of the Six Nations. I was over in Murrayfield. It was really horrible, like that, the few minutes when he was on the ground. But come the Tuesday, he was back into the team meetings, which shows you how highly he is valued. On the Friday, he was doing the captain's run. On the Thursday night, he presented Josh van der Fleer with his 50th cap. So that just shows the sort of, I think, the inclusive environment that Andy Farrell has created, and it also, I think, shows how high Gary Ringrose is rated in there.
Is there any sense? I mean, obviously, his health is the main thing, but he seemed like he was on the pitch getting the medal.
I think I'm not a doctor, but I think the return to play concussion protocols are so much more now about trying to get you back on your feet and trying to get you active and stuff. So I don't necessarily think that means we're going to see Gary Ringrose play against Ulster next weekend. I'm not sure, but I'm sure like Leinster and Ireland, to be fair, have a good track record of giving players as much time. I think in terms of 12, I should mention, I think if Jonathan Daunty had played, throughout the Six Nations, he only played the last 2 games, and outside of Antoine Dupont, he is probably France's most important player. So, and he was a big miss in Dublin. Yeah, as well. He's exceptional.
Look, I think the thing about the if Ireland do play France in the World Cup, it's about the available. The world-class players that both sides have available. I know we have strength in depth, and we're going to talk about it now when we get to the front row, but you absolutely, whoever is most fortuitous with injuries heading into that game are going to be favourites for me on the day before kickoff.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, so much can happen. Like, there's going to be injuries by the time we even get to the start of the World Cup. So what is it? It's going to be a 33-man World Cup squad, and right now we can all pick our World Cup squads, and I would say 31 of the players would be fairly similar across the board, but really and truly they're not all going to make it, and that's just an unfortunate reality, I think, of playing a collision sport. But you definitely feel, I'd say, more confident than you would have been, we'll say, even at this time last year, heading into a situation like that, because I think lots of the players underneath the first tier have really pushed on to another level with Ireland, likes of Ryan Baird, Tom O'Toole, so it's encouraging.
Okay, let's get to the front row. Cyril Bay, Dan Sheehan and Finlay Bealham makes it.
I thought the props were actually the most difficult to pick. I know everyone will probably debate all of my selections, but for me the props were probably the 2 most difficult. So I'll start with Cyril Boyle. Why don't I have Andrew Porter? People are probably saying. I thought Andrew Porter was really, really good for Ireland. Definitely one of their stronger players. For me though, there's still like he like kind of toes a fine line between like being aggressive and over aggressive. He conceded 6 penalties against Wales. He conceded 4 penalties against England. So that's 10 penalties in 2 games for a prop. I still think certain referees feel that he kicks his hips out at scrum time, which is an issue as well. We talk about, you know, painting the right pictures, and I think certain referees are just happy to ping Porter for that. So while I thought he was very good, I just think Cyril Boy was exceptional as well. Like, he's very similar to Andrew Porter. He can do it all. I think he was someone who grew into the tournament as well. He probably looked a little bit leggy in terms of that front loading block that we spoke about, but he was really, really good. Dan Sheehan, I mean, you could have argued maybe Julian Marchand, I think is really only the other player you could have said, but you know, Dan Sheehan missed a game as well, but I thought he was really, really good. Finlay Bealham, I found it hard to pick a tight head, if I'm being honest. Obviously Furlong missed most of the Six Nations, and last weekend, by his own high standards, it was probably his poorest day for Ireland, which we just never say about Ireland. I've actually been amazed with how many people I've seen lots of the people's teams at the tournament, and they have Tadhg Furlong in. They obviously haven't been watching really if you're putting Tadhg Furlong in their team, because Tadhg Furlong is generally a 9 out of 10 every week, and that certainly wasn't a 9 out of 10 last week. So I just couldn't put Tadhg Furlong in for that. I think Xander Ferguson maybe could have been, you know, a shout there. Rooney Antonio obviously, you know, got the suspension after he should have got the red card against Ireland. I didn't think he was particularly good in the Six Nations either. So I landed on Finlay Bealham because I think coming into the Six Nations, if you had said Tadhg Furlong won't play until Murrayfield, you would have been really, really worried, particularly with that France game in round 2. Even going to Wales in round 1, you know, the Welsh scrum has been pretty good this season, even in their regions, as poor as they have been. And no one was talking about Ireland missing Tadhg Furlong, and I think that is a real testament to how much Finlay Bealham has come on. You think that back to Hugo Keenan's try, the stunning set piece move that they scored, and Finlay Bealham was such a key part of that, and it looked like Tadhg Furlong there. So like, it was a seamless switch, and it was really disappointing obviously that he picked up that injury in Rome, but then you have Tadhg Furlong coming back. So people would probably come at me with picking Finlay Bealham, but I mean, I think Xander Ferguson is really probably the only one who has a shout there.
It's got to be a testament to Farrell as well, that like the players that aren't starting are so valued. Like when they come in, it seems seamless. Like throughout.
Yeah, and like he's encouraging them to be themselves, which kind of a lot of people thought was a bit of a cliche at the start. But you think of Mac Hansen, like, I mean, geez, he was coming out with golden quotes throughout the whole Six Nations, even on Saturday night again in the mix zone, just like thrill-a-minute stuff. James Lowe's the same, and Finlay Bealham, by his own sort of admission, is a bit of a quirky character, you know, and they're all being encouraged to just be themselves. And I think Finlay Bealham is one of the guys actually who Netflix are particularly focusing on. He's given him extra access, and I think a lot of people won't be aware of him. Like, he's a bit of a gamer. He just, you know, he likes kind of different kind of things, not to your kind of stereotypical rugby player. And maybe people will see a bit of that when we get the Netflix documentary next year. But I think he probably summed up, you know, the culture, Johnny, that you're talking about in terms of Farrell creating this positive environment. And like, when guys are feeling happy off the pitch, you know, they're going to play better on it, and that is so true. That applies to anything at all. So I thought Finlay Bealham was really, really good throughout the tournament that he played.
We saw him in a full length leg brace at the weekend.
I think he's supposed to be back mid-April. So like, those knee braces can be a bit, you know, you see them and you go, whoa, geez.
Traction.
Yeah, like Jamie Osborne from Leinster, the young Leinster centre, was in one as well last Saturday, so he's going to be out for a while. But I think Bealham is hoping to be back in mid-April. Connacht obviously have an important end of the season, and he's really important there in Connacht. So
yeah, that's a pity about Osborne, because you felt like if there was going to be any potential bolters, he was in that category. Okay, so it's a French and an Irish second row. No, I think, surprised anybody, James Ryan is there. You've gone for Flamand. Am I got that right?
Yeah, well, sounds good to me. Yeah, Thibaut Flamand. Yeah, Thibaut Flamand. He is exceptional. I think he sort of personifies the new age lock. He actually really reminds me of Ryan Baird in terms of his athletic profile, the way he plays the game. And you think that France came into the Six Nations without Cameron Wackey, who is, you know, one of the best young locks in the world. They didn't really miss him, so I thought Flamand was outstanding. James Ryan, I mean, I don't get too kind of caught up in kind of, you know, the players of the tournament, particularly not when it goes to a public vote, which I just think is an absolute nonsense. But I cannot understand how James Ryan hasn't been nominated for Player of the Year. I'm not saying necessarily Player of the Tournament. I'm not saying necessarily he had to win it, but in terms of picking 6 guys, I just think James Ryan was nailed on to be in there.
It seemed curiously biased against the forwards. It was 5 backs and 1, and Keelan Darcy's the only. Am I right?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, off the top of my head. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it, because they're not that glamorous. And it was funny actually. Like, Thomas Ramos had a really good second half of the Six Nations. You know, you mentioned about him not putting him at fullback, but I was talking to a few French journalists after the France game in Ireland, and they were like really critical of Thomas Ramos. He got taken off early in that game. They felt like that it was a lot of the blame was down to him for Ireland winning, and all of a sudden now he's being, you know, nominated for player of the tournament. But I think you're right, Cher. Like, James Ryan's role is so unglamorous, but it's so bloody important to, like I know you guys have spoken about it as well on the show in terms of, like, and I have as well with you, but how important quick ruck ball is. Ryan's role in that is so important in terms of hitting rucks and ensuring that Jameson Gibson Park has quick ball to play off. But they're the kind of things that, like, you know, it's not really sexy.
Not sexy, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So, but in terms of like Irish performance and locks, I thought he was outstanding.
Speaking of sexy, it's an entire Ireland back row that is pretty sexy. O'Mahony, Van der Fleer, Caelan Doris.
Yeah, again, I think Peter O'Mahony fits into the James Ryan category. He won't get a lot of the plaudits, particularly outside Ireland, but I thought he had a quietly outstanding tournament for Ireland, particularly in Murrayfield when everything was going to Potter and the line out. Himself and James Ryan came together and sorted it out. Josh Van der Fleer, I mean, what more can you say about him? Thrown into the line out. Andy Farrell said he took up golf 3 years ago, down to single figures already. The guy's got it all. Caelan Doris, it was really unfortunate. I would be surprised if he had been fully fit in that England game last week. He wasn't at his kind of dominant best, but up to that point, before he got the injury early on in Murrayfield, I think he was nailed on to be probably player of the tournament, and I think now it's definitely more of a debate.
I know there was a debate about the rule and the validity of the rule and the law, and okay, so the law is the law, and so therefore the Scottish quick line out didn't even look that quick, I have to say. But anyway, the piece of athleticism from Doris to win the ball was like Michael Jordan-esque, because it's like, I'm kind of stretching over. It wasn't even straight. And now it's wiped from everything. We're never going to see it again in the highlights rounds.
And it cost Ireland, well, it didn't cost because they had a couple of chances at the end, but a bonus point, and they would have had a Grand Slam with 5 bonus points, which has never been done before. So maybe it was kind of just keep everyone's, you know, expectations. 24 out of 25 points. I know they got a couple of bonus points for winning the Grand Slam, but 24 out of 25 points and still feeling like there's plenty of scope for improvement is a remarkable place to be.
That's the bit, isn't it? That if they can just make sure that the complacency that we felt as a nation before kickoff.
Well, I spoke about that on Saturday as well. My cat, like, saying, like, we can actually, certainly my unit can play a lot better than we have. Is that, and that's not arrogance. It's like, we actually can.
No, I think if you went through each of the games, you'll pick out holes in it. Like, you're never going to have like a full, you know, 100% perfect performance. That's not realistic. But I think if you went through it, and which Ireland will, they will find loads of holes. Like, you think back to the England performance, they probably saved their worst performance to last, really. Like, I know Rome was a bit different because they made a few changes, but to beat England at home with a bonus point to win a Grand Slam, and it was probably like a 7 out of 10 performance, you'd have to say. Like, it's just incredible, really. So I think that's enough to keep everyone's feet on the ground, really, and particularly the coaching staff. So while the players will have enjoyed the last few days, like when they come into camp in July, before the August kind of warm-up games, they'll be given reams of footage, I think, for areas to improve.
And you had, like, say, you had New Zealand, but then you have like Scotland, Italy, England, and obviously the French game, where they had to come through real mental and kind of physical, like, fortitude to need to show that. And it's like, I think that definitely stands to a team. It's like, okay, we'll manage this. We've done this time and time again, different scenarios as well.
And the pressure last week was different to a pressure of going down to New Zealand and winning a third test, because they were at home in front of a home crowd. And I think it was actually better that England came and gave them a game, because they had to find a way to win.
The sending off was a shame in that regard. It was like, because then, like, if it were 15v15,
I think they still would have won. They still would have beaten them, yeah. And Paul O'Connell made this point after the French game, recently, talking about the French game, that he was delighted that Antonio didn't get sent off, because I think that game, certainly there would have been a caveat, you know, of France, but they were down to 14 men. I don't think this England team with 15 men would have beaten Ireland. So pretty good place to be.
All right, Cian, good stuff. I expect it'll be a busy day defending your selections.
Looking forward to my mentions. I
was going to say, Cian Tracey has picked his team in the tournament there, and we're very grateful of the Irish Independent, of course. OTB AM live with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now. John Duggan's with us in a moment. First, to put a bow on our chat about rugby for the morning, here is a slight tangent talking Johnny Sexton.
But if you go back to the lines, like, I still think, and we won't relitigate it, but I still think Gatlin not bringing Sexton one of the most ludicrous decisions of all time.
So does Gatlin at this stage.
He possibly does. I don't know. I'd imagine. You still see a lot of Irish people defending it, and one of the reasons is that Sexton wasn't in form. Now, I absolutely dispute that his form still didn't make him a better out half than Dan Bigger, or you know what I mean. He absolutely, at the very least, on the plane, right? I still think even on his worst day, he's a better player than Finn Russell, whatever, right? He should have been on the tour, okay? But the fact that he could justify not bringing him shows you Sexton has got better in the last 2 or 3 years. Like, he has become, I don't know whether it's smartness or whether it's adaptation to the game or whether he's leading the change in the game, which I think so much of him in some ways that I almost think he is capable of that, of like changing how an attack or is structured in the game of rugby. But he has gone to a new level, as opposed to he's not even hanging on. To your point, it's like it's not even that everybody else has fallen away. It's like Sexton has risen it. It's unbelievable at his age. Yeah, so much so that we're all arguing about whether he should go after the World Cup or not, as opposed to whether he'll make the World Cup.
He shouldn't go, but anyway,
he should.
That's the Lads on a Slight Tangent last night. You can get that on the OTB Daily feed, wherever you get your podcast. John Duggan is with us. John, good morning to you.
Ger and Johnny, how are you both?
Very excited about Evan Ferguson.
Well, he's got his eye in tonight, and hopefully he gets a goal, and that'll then hopefully do him a huge amount of confidence for next Monday, because it'd be difficult enough to go in cold, as good as he's playing.
Any difference to him whatsoever?
You don't think so?
No.
I think so. In an international game against the world finalists.
I think like
Johnny's mic's off there, lads.
Playing a five-a-side or playing
Hang on a second, no one can hear you.
So,
we've censored you.
I'm censored. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Evan Ferguson could be playing a five-a-side against the lads tonight, or against France. I don't think it really makes any odds to him temperamentally. He just seems to be so bulletproof. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope he scores tonight, though.
Yeah, it'd be good to see it, wouldn't it? Clever idea to have the bundle of tickets so that if you want to go to the France game, you got to go to this game as well.
You can go on like Toutless, and I'm not trying to promote Toutless here, but Toutless is class. It's like you can't sell above face value, but you can sell at or below face value to somebody. So like if you can go on to that, say I got Dylan tickets last year for 100 quid on the day that were like probably 140 or something, so you could maybe get Latvia tickets tonight that are slightly below market value. So if you are one of these lads in Donegal or these lassies in Donegal that wants to go to the France game but didn't want to go tonight, you can sell it for like 10 or 15% less or whatever, and you can give a kid a chance to go to see Evan Ferguson make his professional, get his first goal hopefully for Ireland. So it's not. I would entirely defend the FAI in this one. I think
I have no interest in Dylan, I have to say.
I'm not even a massive fan myself, but it was a good show. He's gone well for 81 or whatever.
Well, that's true. That's true. So who else will get a start? Will Smallbone, Mark Sykes, Mikey Johnston all get starts at some stage? I'm interested to see. Obviously, it'd be good to see Nathan Collins play the full 90 and get his eye in as well for next Monday.
What would you do, JD, in terms of the system? Like, because it's Gary Cronin was interested in Saturday. So he's like, I do not like 3 at the back, but we seem almost wedded to it now.
Yeah, and it's hard to say because he was always a 4-3-3 man, Stephen Kenny, wasn't he? So the fact that he feels that the 3 at the back is the best system suggests to me that he doesn't feel that we have enough in the 4 in the middle, and then we have to play 5.
But see, for me, our wing backs, like this, like it looked like our system was suited to the players that we had under in the early Kenny days. Like it suits us because we've really obvious wing backs and we're really strong in the centre back area. But now you're like, well, I'm not actually sure. Like,
do we have the full backs?
Do we have the full? Well,
Seamus Coleman. I know he's been playing regularly for Everton, but is he really a right back you want in your team, or would you prefer Matt Doherty as a wing back?
I could say you could 100% play Owen Bamadeli or Darragh O'Shea right back, no problem. And against good teams, they're going to be defending anyway.
Who's your left back going to be then?
Then the left back, that does open up a situation. And McLean's not an obvious left back. O'Dowd is certainly not an obvious left back.
That might be the reason why he's gone 3-5-2.
But he does seem wedded to it. But then on the flip side of that, you have an overload in midfield to stop these players, like to stop these holes that are appearing when we lose the ball. But it's probably an irrelevant debate.
I think Collins can push into midfield as well, and so we shouldn't be as overall.
You're not wedded to a.
And also, if your fullbacks are intelligent enough, they can come in and be an extra number, like we see when Cancelo was able to do it, or whoever is doing that. Or
they're coached day to day, though. It's harder for a team that's like they're international.
Yeah.
Anyway,
okay, JD, what else?
Well, Matt Doherty captaining the side this evening, and look, hopefully we get a good result. And look, Latvia are not They've played better the last couple of years in the Nations League. I think it's helped them, but ultimately they're 133rd team in the world. We're 48th. We should be winning this evening. Second round bids for Manchester United closing tonight, so the controlling Glazer family probably going to receive in excess of $5 billion for the club. The Qataris seen as the favourites. Sheikh Jassim bin Hamad Al Thani was going to put a bid in with no leverage on it. Jim Ratcliffe of Ineos seen to be the guy who's possibly the next strongest bidder. The Qatari Sheikh, the son of the former Prime Minister, they'll obviously claim they've got nothing to do with the investment authority that is behind Paris Saint-Germain, although there's claims now that Alexander Seferin, the UEFA president, will allow dual ownership of clubs in Europe. That's pretty depressing.
If you're a Man United fan, JD, and say you're a Man United fan, you're 40, 50 years of age, you've sported them Fergie days, blah, blah, blah. What sort of day is this for you? Because it's not like the Glazers with the May West, but they were effectively there to make money.
There's enough Man United fans in the world not to care. And like if you look at Newcastle and the buzz they had around going to Wembley, the fact that they're owned by a nation state, the Saudis, there are enough United fans who are not going to care about this. If they're bought by the Qataris for say 5 or 6 and they put $1 billion then into the club in terms of redeveloping the stadium, the training ground and having an unlimited transfer budget. Unfortunately, the horse is bolted now where you have these institutions that were social institutions now as pawns in geopolitics.
Yeah, and
to launder the image of human rights countries which have chronic human rights records, and that's where the world has gone.
And it's in
unfettered capitalism.
Yeah, it's in the world as well. Man United is this is my problem. This is why I love the League of Ireland to the extent that the Premier League means less to me, because Galway United is a local team. I'm from Galway. They've local players. It's local people. Man United is a world entity now.
Almost bought by the Saudis, though, weren't they?
They actually were
local team for local people.
But now Man United is a global. It's a global brand.
I get your point. However,
it's like,
you know,
it doesn't matter if the locals.
Were you not all in favour of the Saudis taking over Galway at one point?
I was told, in fairness, that it had nothing to do with the government, and I regret that I took that advice. After people went over to Saudi Arabia,
new information came to light.
Yeah, this aggression will not stand.
Yeah,
it's going to be shown the Lighthouse, by the way, very shortly. The Big Lebowski. Yeah, I'll be there. I hope you will.
Skinning up a fat one.
The Big Lebowski.
Yeah,
what's this got to do with?
It's we were just quoting a couple of lines there. I will be sad in the League of Ireland, and this will happen.
You know, the Big Lebowski's got no plot.
It doesn't need a plot because it's so ridiculous. It's just all about the lines. So it's the League of Ireland is a situation where
you could do play on words here. You could do like instead of "Shut up, Donny," "Shut up, Johnny."
Yeah,
the Big Lebowski.
Shut the Johnny. Yeah, I think this is a grim day for football.
Okay,
grim day for football.
Rory McIlroy changes his putter ahead of the match play starts today in Texas. 64 players in the field. Rory plays Scott Stallions first up. Shane Lowry, Taylor Montgomery, his opponent. Seamus Power against Adam Scott.
He needs a spark.
Also recently tinkering with his driver. Is it all getting into his head again ahead of Augusta in 2 weeks' time?
Hopefully something sparks from.
And I don't know if you touched on this, Cavan ladies footballers and the Cavan LGFA over issues around expenses and kit. Strike action being threatened ahead of the game on Saturday against Tyrone.
Met a kid in Luton Airport. Well, kid, he was 24, 25, loves virtual insanity.
Oh well.
He's like, but he says he does a slightly different strategy to you, but he loves your selection.
We're off this week because the match play is an absolute lottery.
Right.
All right. JD.
All right, lads.
Good stuff. More from John, of course, on Saturday afternoon on Off the Ball on News Talk. Here's some of the highlights on the OTB Podcast Network for you today. It's the Hurling Pod, Brian O'Driscoll and Rugby Daily, all top quality stuff. Make sure you subscribe to them all in their individual feeds and of course through the main feeds as well. You can follow Off the Ball across our social and subscribe to our podcast network. After this short break, Enda McNulty is on talking about his new book, Commit to Lead.
You're listening to OTB AM.
Off the Ball.
Another goal.
Every time I turn around, he seems to be celebrating your goal.
Every time his dad sits back down in his chair, he scored again. He's up again with his mates. So it's City 6-0, 7-1 in the night. Again, they've put your dad in the crowd.
They just need to save some of their goals here, don't they?
Not at all.
Save them for when they need them.
Erling Haaland
is meant to be the difference in the Champions League. They want one when it's a tight semi-final.
He'll score one in a tight semi-final too.
Subscribe now to the OTB Football Podcast stream wherever you get your podcasts and download the OTB Sports app.
The Heineken Champions Cup is back. Leinster take on Ulster in the round of 16, Saturday, April 1st at 5:30 in the Aviva Stadium. Join the Sea of Blue for this massive inter-provincial clash. Tickets on sale now at leinsterrugby.ie. Terms and conditions apply.
OTB AM with Gillette Labs. Get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.
Right, Enda McNulty is with us. His new book is called Commit to Lead, Unlock Your True Leadership Potential. You were just looking around the studio there saying it was nice, and it struck me, if you were a man who collected memorabilia, you'd have some collection. Do you collect bits and bobs? Do you have bits and bobs?
I have lots, but I don't have it, let's say, on a cabinet, or I don't have it on walls. I have some of the old jerseys we wore at Queen's, I have some of the old Armagh jerseys. I have my father's blazer he went to New York with Armagh way back in 1982 as the coach. I still have the blazer. So it's all tucked away in cupboards or in drawers. It's not for show for anybody. Please God, someday I'll show it to my kids.
What about the teams that you've worked with? Do you have stuff from them down through the years, or did you...
After the World Cup in Japan, interested, some of the guys' boots were thrown on the floor because they wrecked the boots from scrummaging against the All Blacks, of course. I think it's Tag Furlong boots and Conor Murray's boots. They were thrown in the bin. I said, is it okay, guys, I'd take these because at some stage we'll give them to charity. So some memorabilia like that.
Yeah.
With Ireland, they were incredibly good at the merchandise. So you have bags and bags of kit and gear, and again, you give it out for charity in schools or kids with disabilities. It's always a nice way to make them feel special.
You haven't kept it for sentimental reasons. It's your playing career that you have, and your dad's playing career that you've sentimental stuff about.
Yeah, it's more sentimental. I think the memories are more sentimental than anything else. I'm not big into, the Armagh jersey I wore in 02, and I don't even know where it is, to be honest, but it's the memories for me. It's what it builds in the character.
Yeah, okay. There's loads in the book, right? And I want to get to bits of it, but your story, I think, is really interesting. There's you were doing a day a week with Leinster. How did that come about? How did you start with Leinster?
Luke Fitzgerald, I'd met him actually in the jacuzzi doing a recovery session after a tough Armagh session, and I was sitting in jacuzzi in David Lloyd. A lot of the Leinster guys used to use the same jacuzzi and pool for recovery. They all trained at David Lloyd in the early days in a really old school gym out the back of David Lloyd that is probably the worst gym in Ireland if you look at it in today's circumstance. And in the jacuzzi was a guy called David Moore, who also played a little bit for the Leinster Academy back in the day and for Connacht. I knew Davy and met Davy through his dad. His dad asked me to do some mental toughness coaching with young Davy Moore. Davy Moore was best friends with Luke Fitzgerald. We had a chat in the jacuzzi about, I guess, all aspects performance, all aspects mental toughness. Luke said to me, can we meet in a few weeks? I wouldn't mind talking about that sort of stuff. His dad gave me a call the week later. Des Fitzgerald, who of course has played for Ireland, and he said, almost to vet me, who are you, what's your background, what have you done, how the hell do you know enough to work with my young son? So that went very well. Look, nearly 3 months after that was brought onto the Irish squad. Simultaneously, Michael Kearney, who's now one of the key people in the RFU, Michael Kearney was sitting for breakfast with me in David Lloyd, and at the next table, lo and behold, who sat down beside us, Michael Cheika. Michael Kearney introduced me to Michael Cheika. Cheika was very dismissive, a little bit aloof, not really interested in talking to me. And he said, again, I could see in his eyes more than his body language, something sparked in him.
Had you, when you were talking to Mick Kearney, were you thinking that maybe you could expand at that stage with rugby? So was Luke your first rugby person ever?
No, it was actually St Mary's Rugby Club.
Right.
Because a guy called Stephen Hennessy is still coaching St Mary's in the secondary school there. He's the head of director of rugby. He's a brilliant fella. He spent his whole life coaching rugby in St Mary's. And he asked me, they were going to get relegated. He asked me, Enda, would you do a session with the team? There's a good chance we're going to be relegated. He knew of my work with Armagh, my playing days, and work with some of the semi-pro teams in Ireland in football, Longford Town and so on.
Right.
And he said, is there any way you give us a dig out? We could be relegated here. And I went to St Mary's that night. I'll never forget it, the longest day I live, and I had a real big flashback on it this weekend, because in the change rooms in Mary's when I walked in, they were post-training, and you could see they were wrecked, they were exhausted. There were a lot of them in the room, they were sceptical, a lot of them very resistant, a lot of them totally disinterested. But there was this one fella in the corner, and he was sitting in absolutely intensely focused on what I was saying, and I remember thinking to myself, who's that young guy in the corner? And I said to Hennessy afterwards, who's that young guy? His name is Sexton.
Right.
Sexton hung on to every single word. He was intrigued. I'm not saying he accepted every single word, but you could see he was listening, he was open, he was curious, and he had definitely a growth mindset.
What age was he back then?
He must have been 19 years of age.
Oh.
I thought that we were starting at the start, so we have to go back further, right?
I'm more to Longford Town. Who was involved in Longford Town?
Alan Matthews.
Alan Matthews, there we go. Yeah,
Alan Matthews, and they won 2 FAI Cups. It was brilliant because, again, that was all done pro bono, because it was trying to, like you guys have done in your early days in radio, like way back to 1997 for a juror. So cutting my teeth, getting experience in semi-pro sport and pro sport. And Alan Matthews was brilliant to work with because he was working full-time in the bank. And then we made a lunchtime, he'd come in with the suit and say, what the hell are we going to do to win this next FAI Cup game? And we'd write a plan for the weekend.
There we go.
So you're obviously in college in Queen's and you're playing football with Armagh, and then I think your first full-time job after college, maybe I'm wrong about this, is as a games promotion officer in Dublin, is that right?
Coach and director of Ballybunion St Enda's.
Yeah. Okay.
Very lucky, Ger.
And that's the start of it. That's because what you do now is obviously not the physical coaching of teams. It's a different type of coaching. But is that like in college where you're like, this is where I'm going to go with this? I want to work in sport and coaching and performance.
I remember sitting in a lecture hall in Queen's, and John Kramer, who was the sports psychology lecturer on our course in undergrad psychology, there was 250 undergrads in the psychology lecture hall at the David Kerr building, and he asked the question, he says, how many of you in the audience want to work in criminal psychology? Hands up. How many of you want to work in, let's say, children's psychology? Hands up. How many of you want to work in, let's say, the psychology behaviour of education and so on, all these different things? And then he says, how many of you want to work in applied psychology? Out on the ground, out on the pitch, making a difference in people's lives and applying this brilliant theory in an applied world. Only one hand went up in the audience. It was me.
Right.
I knew wanted to spend my whole life coaching people, training people, advising people, having people, whether it's in the sporting arena, whether it's in the business arena or the performance arts arena. I knew my whole life. I spent my whole life being passionate about that since probably was 14 years of age.
That's really interesting. And in the book, I think, to go back to Cheika, right? So it takes a while, but Cheika gets back in touch with you, and there's a similar grilling, except probably more intense than Des Fitzgerald gave you. But in the middle of that, he actually brings up you getting sent off in a big game, and like, how do you have the credibility to stand in front of my team when you've been sent off? Like, you know, how can you talk about discipline when you were ill-disciplined yourself? But actually, like, I guess he knows the answer to that, because obviously you've got credibility when you say, I have been here, I have made this mistake, I have done the thing that you shouldn't do.
He'd done his research very well. He'd done his research so deep that he went to somebody who played along with me, and he found out, what is this guy really like? Has he got the values and the character that we can trust here in Leinster Rugby? So we'd done his deep research. All those gentlemen, all those ladies in that elite sport, they do deep research on you, your full character. I remember meeting somebody in the Pittsburgh Steelers. We went over there on a study trip and talking to the people that recruited the wide receivers, and asking them, what do you do for your recruitment process? And they said, we go to the primary school.
Right.
And we found out, we go and we interview the person in the primary school that taught the kid to see what the true character was like, even at that stage. So he'd done his research.
The Steelers literally have the greatest reputation in the NFL for recruiting receivers. It's funny, everybody who gets recruited ends up making the team, whereas it's like a lottery pick for the Patriots can't do it.
Can I go back? How did you know that at 14? I'm just like, when you say I knew that at 14 that I wanted to do that, like, was this the inculcation of somebody else in you, or was it like, okay, I'm at this point in my life where I'm ahead of everyone else mentally, that I know what I want to do, or how is that?
I'd say I'm still not ahead of anybody else, Johnny, but I'd say I'm very curious and very hungry to learn. At 14 years of age, my father gave me a book called The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galloway. When I read that book from cover to cover and then multiple times, I started to think, there's not much point in me doing all this running, and even at that stage I was playing senior football. Kieran McGeeney, in terms of people that inspire you, Kieran McGeeney was a 19-year-old and he was the shape of an international rugby player at 19 years of age. So at that stage I was training with those senior footballers. My dad was the coach of the senior team. A few of the guys used to turn up drunk to the matches. My dad couldn't trust them. I had developed early, and he said, and you go to corner forward, and the big tough senior footballers would look after me, but I would still be playing. And at that stage, my dad used to, on the way back from the matches in an old Renault 18, he played tapes of Lou Tice, who'd worked in American football. And Lou Tice was talking about positive psychology, mental toughness, coaching people to be the best version of themselves.
Where the hell did he get the Lou Tice tapes in like 1980s, 1990s Armagh?
Yeah, probably late 1980s, early 1990s. Where he got it was
sent off for them.
Interestingly, my dad was a teacher, and then because of the peace process in Northern Ireland, they were trying to get the peace done. And the SDLP, a party led by Seamus Mallon, who we talked about a lot in the book, he sent my father off on a course and said, Joe, we want you to be a development consultant here, figuring out a way to bring the unionist and loyalist community together with the nationalist community to build, let's say, regeneration of rural South Armagh. Will you go on a course before you take this role, Joe? And Joe said, absolutely. My daddy said, absolutely. And one of the courses that he went on was Investment in Excellence, delivered by Lou Tice, who was a guy who'd worked with, let's say, the best American football players, the best CEOs, the best people in performance arts in the States.
Right.
That is mad. Like Seamus Mallon, and he was acutely aware from Market Hill, so he's kind of aware of bringing people together, and that sets your dad on the path to kind of, I guess, influencing you as a 14-year-old.
Fortunate, Johnny. Yeah. And I think we've all a responsibility to, if we're coaching kids, if we're communicating to kids like we are today, to get children to realise that it's not only about what you do on the hurling pitch or the hockey pitch or the rugby pitch, but it's your inner game. Your inner game is going to be more important to you in life, because it's about life, not about how well we do in sport.
I do find that fascinating. We did chat there a couple of weeks ago about all the girls that are just going out of sport from very early age. How do you keep people on the periphery, just keep them believing in themselves and know that this is just you're on the ladder here.
I love the Niall Moyna interview that you gentlemen have done here on Off the Ball. I think it's fascinating. So I think in terms of,
be a stretch, but
yeah, he's incredible. So what do I think about that? I think if we work on people's inner game, they're going to be better at dealing with the adversity of life. And we speak about that, of course, a lot in the book in terms of resilience, building through resilience. I think we've got a real big opportunity of that in early days with kids in their development. But even for adults, we know that from the US military, we can develop their strong resilience or their adversity quotient.
Can we go back to Leinster then? Because it feels like, in retrospect, Leinster's your big break in many ways. Is that so? Again, you're doing a day a week after you pass Cheika's test. You're doing a day a week with them, contracted, and you go to a training session, and Cheika challenges you to find who are the leaders here, who are the people who are doing the things that I need to do, and you identify Shane Jennings, and then Shane Jennings. I don't know if it's unprompted or if Cheika has said, listen, this guy really rates you. You go and have a chat with him, or if it had been unprompted. I don't know what your instinct is about whether or not that was instinctive from Jennings, but you guys meet and Jennings wants more from you.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Shane Jennings. I think he's one of the unsung heroes in Irish rugby. I think he was one of the cultural architects. So I used to go and watch Leinster training sessions. I was contracted one day a week, but to be honest with you, it was a full week of thinking, because it's a bit like being on air. It's not what you do on air, it's what you do off air. You're thinking behind it. So I used to go and sit in some of the training sessions at the RDS, and I'd sit away up in the top row of the RDS in a freezing cold winter's day, and you could hear Cheika from the far side of the stand roaring, encouraging, driving standards, and then I suppose we really resonated with each other. I met him for a coffee, I think in Coffee Society in Ranelagh, and he vigorously challenged me as Shane always does, and in that conversation he was saying to me, what about my own game? Well, how can I improve? Because I can't tell anybody else to improve unless I don't improve. And then lo and behold, every time I ever met him, including 2 weeks ago or a few weeks ago, went to one of the Leinster games with Shane Jennings, and lo and behold, he's still improving. Now he's a CEO of a very successful organisation. So Jennings is the epitome for me of a cultural architect, somebody who sets standards, somebody who drives the bar up, finds a way to drive it up even though others around him might resist. He's the fella that in the trenches is always encouraging. Even if he's playing shit himself, he's still encouraging and driving others on. He's a general.
When did you go full-time with Leinster, or did you ever go full-time?
Never went to full-time, and I'm actually very happy that I didn't, Ger.
Right.
Because I think if you really want to grow, it's about different performance crucibles. I never went full-time with Leinster or Ireland, and I always was appreciative of that flexibility that Ireland and Leinster give me, because for the rest of the week then, you're sitting down with somebody who's a surgeon on babies' eyes. Now for me that's a pretty important performance crucible. So I loved, and I still love, that eclectic genre of performance crucibles rather than just one.
Is Leinster though important in terms of giving you the credibility to walk into the other rooms?
Massive.
Not that you weren't kind of building that anyway, but
massive, Ger. Really appreciative of that, and they deserve all that credit. I don't deserve any credit for what happened in Leinster, but I can say I've learned a huge amount. You learn a huge amount from watching Johnny Sexton doing kicking post training, and you're with him for an hour and a half, and you're kicking the balls back to him, but I'll be honest, when you're kicking the balls back to him, you're going surely I've got more experience than just kicking the ball back. But then when you watch him intensely focus for an hour and a half in the freezing cold, there's nobody else there on the pitch, you're learning from him, and you're learning his story.
How much of Sexton is not his actual ability? For if he's still the best out half in the world, how has he become this?
Well, the quality of Sexton's practice, he reminds me of Issa Nasiwa, if we're linking it back to Leinster. Issa Nasiwa in his post-practice sessions was just like watching Mozart. It was incredible. The intense focus in his eyes for every high ball, and I'll never forget it. The quality of deliberate practice, jumping, focus, arms, hands, as if he's playing in a huge Heineken Cup final. I'll never forget it. Sexton similarly, Josh van der Flaer, Robbie Henshaw, watching those guys in post-practice, watching them work with Andy Farrell behind the goalpost on tackle tech. It was like watching art form.
There's a famous scene that the Meath lads talk about where they go and visit Sean Boylan in his kitchen, and at his kitchen table they tell him to take his shyness out of his arse pocket and start being the boss. And it's funny how you bring up the importance of kitchen tables in the book as well. There's a summit meeting where a random cross-section, but completely not random, of the leaders, different age groups, and the cultural architects meet in Leinster to decide that enough is enough. We've had enough of the losing. And I'm interested now in retrospect, when you list off the names, it's like Leo Cullen and Brian O'Driscoll and Sean O'Brien and Cheika, so obviously massive characters, but how do they interact with each other? Because they all have their own individual styles, and they all have their own individual bits of baggage and bits of biases, and so is it straightforward? Is it a straight line, or was there a little bit of naughtiness to work through?
No straight lines. I wouldn't have wrote this story, by the way, without Gerard Gilroy prompting me about a year ago that, Enda, you have to tell the story, so I'm very thankful.
Better get a free book now.
So that was actually at Cheika's kitchen table. Stephanie was in the house, Cheika's wife, and what happened was, it was in the middle of winter, things weren't going that well. We had said that we need to get a real honest, very vigorous team talk. 8 of the leaders were brought together. I think Shawnee, Johnny, Shane Jennings, Shane Horgan, Brian O'Driscoll, Leo Cullen, of course. And it wasn't a nice conversation. It was a robust, brutally honest conversation. And it was from everything from game plan, and Brian O'Driscoll is like, let's say, an amazing conductor of the orchestra in terms of understanding game plan. Sexton was at the table, and it was about, what do we have to do to make sure this team wins and unlocks their true potential?
Like, Sexton's a kid at this stage, really, and not guaranteed his place, because Felipe's ahead of him. But I think Felipe might already have been injured or not. But for him even to be there, obviously somebody had spotted the fact that intensity that you were talking about at Mary's was transmissible to the rest of the team as well, in terms of, okay, somebody's coming up, he hasn't quite reached the level that we don't know how good he's going to be. He's a bit of a late developer, but he's definitely worth having in the room when we're deciding the entire future of the season.
Everybody used mentality. At that stage, believe it or not, Cheika might have been Johnny might have been a third choice number 10 in Leinster. So first was obviously Felipe, second was Chris Whitaker.
Right.
And I remember bumping into Johnny one morning on his way to training. I live in the same apartment complex as Johnny, so that came up as fortune, because you get to meet him regularly during the week, not just on the training pitch, not just in your one-on-ones. And I remember him saying to me, I'm not picked for the squad for the weekend. So he was the third choice 10 at Leinster. To come back to your question, Johnny, about the talent and the ability of this fella, his mentality, I think has been phenomenal.
I that definitely sets him apart for me, because there are probably more naturally gifted players who achieve 20% of what he did.
See, I don't believe in naturally gifted. I believe in it's all about the quality of your practice over a 20-year period. So this guy's 37 now. If you start throwing,
well, Joe Canning then. So is Joe? This is the thing. When you watch Leo Cregale, you're like, did Joe Canning become the player he did by bashing the ball off the wall from 3 years of age constantly
with Ollie Canning as his brother?
Yeah, or was it natural ability? It's a good question, because you would say, oh, Joe, it's natural ability, but actually no, maybe he
talks in the Laker Gale about breaking a window, and there's hitting freeze and breaking the window again and again and again, but also he was marking Ollie every day. He was battering him until he could batter him back.
It is interesting, because we have this notion of Evan Ferguson is a natural ability, and he does, but also Evan Ferguson is the son of a professional footballer. Do you know what I mean? And he's been brought along on the right path.
Well, it's a hell of a... There's a neuroscientist, a good friend of mine called Professor Ian Robertson. He talks about the secret ladder. All of the best performers in life have that secret ladder. It's a brother, it's a coach, it's a teacher, it's a sister. It's somebody, when they were a little kid at 6 years of age, started to say to them, use your left hand, not just your right hand. So I think it's that secret ladder that sometimes we forget about. Every one of those Ireland players last weekend have all had a secret ladder. Thankfully now in our sport, we're creating that secret ladder across the board.
To go back to the Armagh situation, again, really fascinating insight into the preparation for the 2003 All-Ireland, where you all completely go mad in the build-up to the game and go off training, and battering each other and killing yourselves. And I'm like, so how do you stand credibly in front of the room and say, you need to rest this week, lads, because you have the track record of it?
Made all the mistakes. First up, in that 2003 All-Ireland final against Tyrone, I made almost every mistake you can imagine. One of them was on the Friday night before the game. I went to a beach at, I think it was Julianstown. Desi Ryan, my old friend and coach, I spoke to him on Sunday night on the way back down the road from Armagh. And Desi, he's 83 years of age now. It's a lifelong coaching and mentoring relationship. But interestingly, that night in Julianstown, he took me for a session on the beach to be ready for Canavan. That session lasted 2 hours. I was exhausted afterwards. So that was exactly what you shouldn't be doing. However, in now working with elite professional athletes, I'm able to say to them, I always start, even in the one-on-one still with some of the Irish players, let's talk about your recovery. Let's get the recovery down first of all before we talk about anything else. So I think rest and recovery is highly underrated. I remember talking to Lukey way back in the day. I'd say, Lukey, tell me about your match day preparation. I'll get up about 9 o'clock. What will you do then? I'll have breakfast. What will you do then, Lukey? I'll go back to bed. What will you do then? I'll maybe read a magazine or a paper, whatever. So what will you do then? I'll have my lunch. What will you do then? I'll go back to bed. So I learned a lot from working with those fellas as well in terms of their recovery protocols.
Right. In retrospect, would you think Tyrone were probably doing the same thing though? Is that like the wisdom hadn't transmitted into GA, that it was bigger is best?
I think Tyrone probably were better at relaxing. I think they were probably better at enjoying the journey. I think we were probably too intense when I look back. I think we tried too hard.
I presumed you were in the water when you said I went to Julianstown. I spent like half an hour putting my legs in the water, not having a 2 hour session.
2 hour session and Desi is relentless on the quality of his practice. So it was 2 hour session on trying to deal with Canavan's footwork. And looking back, that was absolutely insanity because Peter had wrecked his ankle. He wasn't fit to walk in that final. And the real stupidity wasn't my lack of recovery.
He went on. That's the final comes on and off, is it?
That's the final comes on and off. And he wasn't fit to walk. So I should have went to Joe and said, Joe, take me off Peter because Peter isn't fit to walk here. Put me on O'Neill, who was having an unbelievable game that day.
Who would have been the person to turn to Geezer and say, listen, we're a bit too intense here? I'm not sure anybody has the...
I would go to Geezer regularly. We would regularly sit down and have open, honest chats. Geezer lived in Dublin at that stage.
In 03, look, I think we might be overdoing it here. Because you'd all, this was the year of the tight shirts, right?
Started,
yeah. Well, to be honest, we didn't know it, sure.
Right.
We didn't know at the time we were overdoing it. Now, you'd say that anybody with wisdom in a high-performance environment would have seen that. But to be honest with you, we didn't know it. We thought that this is going to help us go to the next level.
Yeah.
We overcooked. What was that old phrase that Ronaldo famously had with Neville? He said, be wary of overly watering the plant. Too much water kills the plant. You water. Eventually the plant's going to die. So when Neville was challenging Ronaldo, but why is not winning every single sprint?
Yeah.
And Neville was trying to win every single sprint, but he's seen that Ronaldo was winning 3 out of 10. In Armagh, we were trying to win 10 out of 10. There's time to ease off as the horse trainers, and you've interviewed here the best horse trainers. The best horse trainers know to ease off the horse. I was ridiculously, intensely focused for far too long of my career.
And when did the wisdom come from that? From talking to the rugby lads and seeing how they did it? Was that is it literally a penny drops, or is it a slow kind of retrospective? Actually,
watching Olympic athletes training all over the world. That's when the penny dropped. David Gillick, I'm always very thankful you asked about a big break. I was working with David Gillick as well. We had a brilliant relationship. Watching him train in Loughborough University and going along to the session and asking him, is it okay that I train with him? If there was nobody else around other than 3 or 4 other athletes, he said it's okay, and I would stay maybe 30, 40 metres away so it wouldn't embarrass them or vice versa. But I was watching them going, there must be more to it than this. We're doing 20 minutes and going home. So I was going, what the hell? I'm doing 3 sessions with Armagh that particular day. Me and Geezer were doing a tackling session at the Phoenix Park. Then we get launched. Then we go and do a sprint session on the track at Santry. And then we go to Armagh training that night. And yet I'm watching the professional athletes and they're doing a 20-minute activation with medicine balls. So that's when the penny dropped. But it was too late in my career.
Less is more.
Less is more.
Yeah. I remember trying to get into the gym and I was flat out doing this thing, and I basically I didn't ask anyone for advice, and then I was just told you're doing 4 times as much as you should, and I was actually causing so much problem. It's you less is more, and horses are trained exactly for that.
There's a template for you in the book as well, Johnny, don't worry.
Yeah, well, actually, I am interested though. The skeptics who still will have listened to this morning, they come in skeptical, they're even more skeptical now. How do you deal with that? We know a particular fellow Ulster man of yours that I'm not going to name. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, I accept skepticism. I expect it. You're going to get that. That's life. If you want everybody to agree with you in life, I think Steve Jobs famously said about leaders, if you want everybody to like you as a leader, go and serve ice cream for a living and they're all going to like you. So I don't expect everybody's going to love everything we're saying. What I do expect is people to be open-minded. When people are resistant, your job as a communicator, your job as a coach, as a leader is to try and get them to at least be open-minded about an alternative view. One of my mentors in life, he's in a phenomenal leadership mentor. He's Tim O'Connor. He's an ex-conciliary for the Irish government to the US government. And he talks about the concept, when you're having a conversation with somebody, with a leader, you're trying to make sure they don't have an exclamation mark and a full stop at the end of the sentence, that there's a semicolon. In other words, there's an alternative view. Let's meld our views together. Let's respect each other's views. Let's have a real vigorous debate like what we're doing here. And if I still don't like it, I'm okay with that, Johnny. I respect that. I have no qualms with that whatsoever.
Have you had any conversations with, say, people from the unionist community, even politicians from the unionist community, saying exactly what you're saying there?
Of course. My brother Justin is an MLA in the North, in Stormont. Very regularly I've had conversations with people in the unionist community. Some of the people in Ireland camp are from the unionist community. Some people in Armagh, Ireland camp, are unionist community. So very respectful. Seamus Mallon, wasn't he the epitome of talking about a shared home place? So I would like that we all in Ireland start to think about the future of everybody's welcome, no matter what community they're from. I don't give a damn whether it's the Afro-Caribbean community, the fellow who served me coffee this morning, or whether it's a unionist community in the North. Everybody should be made feel very, very welcome and very much at home.
Something for slow learners, like. Yeah.
Can we talk about the World Cup and now how you reflect on Japan? Because I heard your interview with Luke last week and it was really interesting just to get the perspective from this distance now. You talked about the learnings, obviously. Personally, I felt a little bit like you got thrown under the bus, and that's. If you want to talk about that, we can. If you don't, I totally understand that too. But what if you were to put your finger on what went wrong and how you would change things now, if you could tap yourself on the shoulder, what would you say to yourself now?
18 months before the World Cup, I would have been better at communicating. 18 months before the World Cup, I would have been better at influencing. Because it's not just good enough to say something and send an email and write a pretty comprehensive report. It's only good enough if you influence positive change. So if I was to tap myself on the shoulder now, it would have been, Miss Evan Joe used to have deep 3-hour conversations outside of camp on normally a Wednesday afternoon in a hotel in Ballsbridge, and those 3.5-hour conversations were like intellectual tennis or intellectual rugby. I would present an idea, Joe would challenge me on it. I'd present another idea, he'd challenge me on it. 3.5 hours later, we're still there and he's still debating vigorously. By the way, he might only take one idea away and apply it, or he might take none away and apply it. So if I was to go back again and tap myself on the shoulder and say, Enda, you're going to have to do a better job at influencing more positive change around 3 core areas. One, we need to make sure the team is more stress tested under the most incredible pressure, because my belief is, and I could be well wrong, and there's people more qualified in rugby than I am, by 100x or 1000x, people like Brian O'Driscoll and co, people like Andy Ford, who's a phenomenal coach. I believe that the scale of difficulty of the World Cup is 10x the Six Nations. And the contrast I would give there is we played Meath in a challenge match in Navan in 1999 and we beat them by something like 15 points. We played them in the semi-final of Ireland that same year and they gave us the mother and father of all lessons. And Sean Boylan ran across that pitch in the middle of that game and he gave instructions in to the guy that was marking, I think it was I was marking somebody like Tommy Dowd, and he was giving instructions into his ear. I could hear it real time and it was like a totally different scale of difficulty than beating them in Navan. What was that, 6 months earlier?
Yeah, is this team stress tested then, this Irish rugby team?
I think they're better stress tested now than they ever were before. I think that you've seen in the Six Nations against Scotland what happened when they were really under stress, like the Josh van der Flaer moment, obviously at line out time. I think they've got people around them now who have been in the World Cup cauldron more, like the Paul O'Connells, of course, that understands that, and the Simon Easterbys. I think a big unsung hero as a coach. He's been there now for 3 World Cup cycles. That's phenomenal. Obviously Andy Farrell's been stress tested both with Ireland and England as a coach at World Cup time, so I think that's a huge asset. I also think that Johnny Sexton is much more stress tested now than before, and I hope he stays healthy, because sometimes your biggest strength can become, it's almost, what do they call it, like a Shakespearean flaw, when your biggest strength can become your biggest weakness. So you were saying there were three areas. One was the stress test that you were talking about. If you were to go back to yourself 18 months out, I'd say yes, stress test the team more vigorously, more regularly. 1. 2, I would say, is make sure that the bench strength is much deeper and much wider, and I think they've done a much better job this time round. And I would say be unexpected in that, because I know working with Ian Madigan, who was a phenomenally talented player as well, working with Madigan in the England and Wales World Cup, Johnny got injured, Mads steps in, he had all the game, but Mads would probably say himself that he hadn't done enough work on his mental game to be ready for that Argentina game. So bench strength, number 2. Number 3, I would say, is that the adaptability that Andy Farrell spoke about in the last few weeks, I would have baked that in more regularly in the 18 months before the last World Cup and build that adaptability and adversity quotient. Now, the only way we'll know if that's been done well enough in the last 12 months to 18 months is in another 6 months.
Yeah, and it's obviously a lot of, like, it'll depend on the results. In a way, if we get beaten in a quarter-final and play the best game that we can play, but we come up against the France team, who turns out are an all-time great France team, then that's fine. But if we don't perform, that'll be the evidence that it hasn't reached the level that it should do.
I think they'll be hugely disappointed if they don't get well beyond, the pool stage in this World Cup, because their body of experience, their body of work in the last 4 years has been world-class, world-leading. So they've raised the bar on the last, let's say, World Cup cycle. I think they'd be devastated not to get beyond the World Cup quarter-final.
Are the players quite simply happier under Farrell than Schmidt?
I'd say yes, honestly, Johnny. Now, is that a criticism of Joe? I think all coaches have different strengths. I think some of Joe's biggest strengths are very complementary to Andy's biggest strengths. So are they happy around camp? Yes, I think Joe would admit that himself. I don't think Joe wanted people to be happy, to love every single second of camp. That wasn't his style. That wasn't his leadership style. I think Andy is much more about the family, much more about the environment, much more about, let's say, empowering the players. That's not to say Joe's style was wrong. I think that what we need to do, and this go back to leadership, leaders should stick to their biggest strengths. Joe's biggest strength wasn't having the family around all the time. It wasn't always about being empowering. He was the best in the world technical, tactical coach, bar none.
That's really interesting, like that that these things can coexist in a way, or that one serves one purpose and one serves another. And it seems like the technical, tactical thing, Farrell has brought...
delegated,
definitely, yeah. That they've. So he was obviously very good at defence, right? But he's handed that over to Easterby, and they've also brought Paul O'Connell on board to do a bit of what Schmidt was doing, and so you would say that there's the leadership team has grown by virtue of the fact that it's distributed among more people, as opposed to, I know there's like leadership jargon around command and control.
Also, that can't be straightforward at all, because there has to be like a structure, but also like a delegation responsibility, but also like a trust among each other, and no egos really, or I imagine anyway. It's like, I
think psychological safety, if you go to the research behind great leadership environments, great leadership groups, psychological safety is fundamental. In other words, everybody feels they've got a voice. I think it's a much stronger environment on that now than it was probably 4 years ago, 8 years ago, maybe 10 years ago when I started to get involved with Ireland Rugby. I think it's much stronger now. That's not to say that anybody was in the wrong in the past. All organisations evolve, like this organisation. Look at the way Off the Ball's evolved over the last 20 years. It's a phenomenal evolution. So it evolves. And by the way, we need different leaders at different stages. So if you look at what's happening in the free world, now we've got obviously Joe Biden as the leader of the free world, whereas 4 years ago we had Trump. Now, please be to God we don't go back to Trump again. I think at the moment Andy Farrell's leadership style is the right man in the right place with the right squad, with the right leaders. There's no doubt about that.
At the right time.
At the right time.
Well, I really hope it is the right time, because that would certainly be great. One last thing, Michael Check, obviously a good friend of yours, somebody you've worked with a lot. Are you thinking maybe you might be involved with Argentina at all for coming around the World Cup?
Checa is some character. He touched base with me about 2 weeks ago, as he always does, and he'll touch base when he's got a problem statement. And his problem statement, believe it or not, he won't mind me saying this, was what do you think about X, Y, or Z? Could you come back to me on this? Give me your thoughts and perspective. So then you give him that perspective. You mightn't hear him for another week. And then when you give him that perspective, a week later he says, yeah, that's interesting, mate. Come back to me again another week with it. So will I be involved with Argentina? No. And the reason for that is we're expecting our first kid in August.
Congratulations.
So that'll be priority number one.
Soften your cough.
That kid has no chance in life. He or she's going to be like, world leader at 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you not be a Tiger parent?
I've learned that from my parents. I've learned that from brilliant people around me. Hopefully I won't be as relentless as a parent as I was as a young footballer, as a young leader.
I think we've seen in Castlebar, let them develop themselves as well.
Absolutely. I think it takes a whole village to raise a child. Hopefully it'll be the village and myself and my wife Julie that raises the child.
What part of the world?
We're living in Dublin, living in Rathgar.
We're living in Rathgar, that's alright, yeah. Got to check out Orwell Road the weekend. Yeah.
A lot of the guys you bump into them still on the way around that area of South Dublin. We're very fortunate. But what I would say is, I'd say a big thank you to Off the Ball, because you're on with breaks in life. When I did an interview with Ger Gilroy about 15 years ago, a gentleman listening that day was a global CEO. He called me on the Monday and said, Enda, could I have a cup of coffee? And actually we were talking about Leinster Rugby. So I'd be always thankful and I would always be appreciative.
The power of radio, folks. Well, look, Enda, it's been great, and the book is excellent. Read it. It's called Commit to Lead, Unlock Your True Leadership Potential, and we wish you the very best of luck with it. Thanks a million.
Thanks for the opportunity.
On tomorrow's show, Ireland-Latvia reaction, Vinnie Perth, Senna Nuupa previews the Women's Six Nations, David Brady, and plenty more besides. Here's Gavin Cooney from last night's football show. Enjoy your day.
And just to say up front, if you notice a hint of me being passive aggressive towards our next guest, or even just all out aggressive, you're not mistaken, because Gavin Cooney, the 42, is going to Augusta.
How are you? Yeah.
Disgusting.
Yeah, I'm delighted, in fairness.
We're all delighted for you.
I think you're grinding your teeth there. Yeah, no, in fairness, yeah, got the opportunity through my fabulous employers. I should put that out there. So, yeah, can't wait. So it's, I've got a pretty cool week or two coming up, because it's Ireland camp now, Latvia, and then France, and then a couple of days off, and then head for the States.
Not bad at all. We'll talk about all that in due course. Maybe make an appearance on Golf Week, perhaps. To cast a brief glance back to the weekend that was, I would like to welcome Roy and Ray back to the club, said Steve Parish to a frankly disbelieving Crystal Palace fraternity. Ray Lewington back in. Roy Hodgson, 75 years old now. Hodgson back in. Watford, January to May of last year, relegated to the Championship. I think most of us thought, well, that's probably that, but not Steve Parish. So this is quite something.
Yeah, parish politics. I can't see beyond the man in front of you, which is Roy Hodgson back at Crystal Palace again to replace Patrick Vieira. I mean, we all praised, Steve Parish only 18 months ago, having, they had Hodgson and they had a certain style of play, and look, it wasn't very exciting, but it would guarantee a Premier League. And then they made the brave move to appoint Patrick Vieira, and it went really well last season, FA Cup semi-finals, and played some great football in the league as well. And then at the first sign of trouble, ditch him and bring back Hodgson just for a kind of a stay in the Premier League card, which is, I've never seen such a neat distillation of panic, and what panic and the potential loss of millions will do for you, to go all the way back to Hodgson. Deeply uninspiring, I have to say. And plus, Parish is ignoring the fact that seemingly one of the rules in football is that Crystal Palace can lose as many games as they like and are not allowed fall beneath 12th in the Premier League. They do seem to have that kind of welfare floor there for you. So, happy days for Hodgson, I suppose, to have him back at 75. It now means, by the way, apparently, I saw it on Reddit, 25% of the Premier League managers now are former Watford managers. Good figure.
I would think even Roy Hodgson was a bit like, really? I'll do it.
Do you think he was surprised to get because he pitched up at Watford? I just trying to remember what I remember of Roy Hodgson's stint at Watford. I felt there's a lot of sunglasses wearing. Perhaps gratuitous sunglasses wearing, and I remember he spoke with an air of a man who was deeply confident that Watford were going to go down, and he was, there's really nothing I can do here, lads, but Palace should be fine. I really feel that they acted very hastily in getting rid of Vieira. Obviously the form since the turn of the year had been very bad. They hadn't won a game all year. I think had they gone 2 or 3 games without a shot on target, so clearly weren't playing well, but they had a tough run of fixtures. And I don't think that they have any fixtures left against the top 8, if not the top 10.
A lot of teams around them.
And look, you don't have to do a whole lot to stay in the Premier League from here on. There's a lot of bad teams down there. And it's just because everything is so compressed. Usually you might find yourself clear danger. But if, Leeds vaulted to 14th place with a win at the weekend. So it only takes a couple of results to totally dispel the notion that you're in any danger of going down. So real, panicky decision from Palace and very uninspiring.
It would seem Daniel Levy is making a less panicky but very deliberate decision, according to reports as well, on Antonio Conte. Expected to be sacked is the general reporting right across the board. We had Kenny Cunningham in last night, and I was like, it was amazingly strong. He completely agreed with Conte. He said of Spurs for the last year and into some of last season, he hasn't come across a team that try less. He looks on at them and he thinks, frankly, they're a disgrace. They genuinely are not trying.
Really?
And he understands the Conte frustration. So he absolutely buys into this is a man at the end of his tether, nuclear option, boiling over in complete frustration, explanation of Conte's behaviour, as opposed to self-serving, I'm going to preserve my reputation. He thinks Spurs and their players are a disgrace, and he thinks, I totally understand how Conte erupted the way he did. And even on Kane, he said at the weekend and beyond, he's looking at Harry Kane make these fake attempts to press and, so I'm out of the game, sorry, you've knocked it by me. Bruno at Anfield style. And he says there's a danger if Manchester United buy him, they're buying Ronaldo Part 2 problem. His legs maybe have gone physically as well as just application. So it was really interesting. I had thought Kenny would be, well, you can't do that publicly.
Yeah.
This is not how things work. He was far more in the camp of, they are a disgrace.
I regret not hearing that now, because I hadn't heard that elsewhere. Had he any other examples of them not trying?
Oh, take your pick.
Really? Why?
Yeah. And numerous.
Did he feel? Again, I'm sorry I didn't hear this, but did he feel like that's going back to last season as well, or is this okay? Because the results were pretty good last season.
No, he's
toward the end.
He has looked at them and thought there's something very odd about that dressing room for some time, and he's noted the numerous games where they go behind, and that's a trigger some way mid-second half for them to go, right, come on then, let's try a leg. And he says they're obviously a very good team then, because they've lots of good players.
But is that not the original sin of a manager, that he can't motivate them not to try?
Well,
and I know, like, in an ideal world that's not fair, but life's not fair, and football, it's always easier to get rid of one manager than a full dressing room. So, taking...
I think he understands how this is going to go. Yeah. He looks at Kane, and I mean, anyone else can listen back to it, but he does see a slightly self-serving senior pro in that dressing room. He thinks, Lloris, Son, quite self-contained, focused on his own performance. Kane on his own performance.
I would agree on Kane, because Kane insisted on playing half fit in the Champions League final. He wasn't fit for that game, and it cost Spurs. It really did. Like, Liverpool started Firmino, who wasn't fit, but Klopp could at least take him off. Pochettino, obviously, Kane, you can't be subbing Kane off. He's like the Ronaldo. The Ronaldo comparison is a good one in the sense that you couldn't sub Ronaldo off, but obviously you can't sub Kane off. Sorry, I interrupted you.
So he thinks it's not that they're quote unquote bad pros, or that was the talk around Old Trafford for numerous years. The senior pros there weren't setting a good example. He doesn't think Harry Kane's a bad example per se, but he doesn't see him as a leader. Doesn't see Son as a leader. Doesn't see Lloris really as a leader. So he thinks
Lloris is captain of France. That's
I know.
A bit harsh, I think.
Yeah, potentially is, but he thinks it's a funny dressing room.
Yeah,
and Conte's had his fill.
Maybe. I still don't think you can come out and say those things. I mean, it's his job to motivate the dressing room. Now, actually, Matt Doherty was doing press with Ireland today, and he was interesting when asked about Conte. He said that he really defended Conte and said one of the greatest ever managers. Hopes he stays at Tottenham. But the most interesting line was he wouldn't say something to the press that he wouldn't say behind closed doors.
I had those quotes. I hope he stays at Spurs for a long time. He's an unbelievable coach, an unbelievable manager. He won't say anything in the press that he won't say to his players. He's completely honest with the players, has the passion for the whole club. For me, I hope Spurs stick by him, hold on to him for as long as possible. He is one of the best managers of all time. Two things: if ever a player might have felt aggrieved and quite happy to kick a manager when he's down, it would be Doherty and Conte. And secondly, Doherty was not afraid to go on 2FM and let everybody know just how little Roy Keane did.
Completely.
So his word here carries a lot of weight.
Yeah.
So now I'm firmly in Conte camp here.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was, because I was when I heard Matt Doherty was doing press, I was really looking forward to him answering that question, because you will get, like you say, an honest response. And he was treated very shabbily by Conte directly with those comments back last October. I'm not silly, I don't want to lose, or something in reference to playing Doherty. And then he was treated terribly by the club. You know, there was go on loan at the last day of the January transfer window, and then, oh, hang on, we actually have too many players out on loan, so we're just going to have to rip up your deal here, Matt. Sorry about that.
Look,
there's the he really stood by him, and as I am now reading that line in a slightly different light, that he wouldn't say anything to the press that he isn't saying behind closed doors. I still think he shouldn't have said it. I can't.
Not if he wants to continue as manager. I mean, it's over now.
But he clearly doesn't want to continue as manager.
No.
And like, I know Conte has personally had a very difficult season with, he has been pretty significantly ill, and he's also had, his Gianpiero Ventrone at Spurs, he passed away, the fitness coach, Sinisa Mihajlovic and Gianluca Vialli, who's close with reportedly as well, all passed away. So that's, like, personal circumstances have been very difficult for the last few months. But I have to say, I thought those comments were a disgrace. You can't come out and slaughter your players like that in public. And it can't be so obviously self-serving, because it's of a piece. He's been critical of the players throughout his time there, really. Has been critical of the supposed unrealistically high expectations of the supporters as well. And I really did feel like, is this the most obvious example we've ever had of a manager washing his hands of responsibility for something?
Mm.
And it's also, like, not to get too highfalutin about it, but it is like a new postmodern stage for football's banter era. Like, this is fully postmodern now, when the manager is quoting the memes used to insult Tottenham. This was, lads, it's Tottenham, or Chiellini, this is the history of the Tottenham. I think actually Conte's line was, the story of Tottenham is this, or something along those lines. And I understand, like, he's obviously extremely unpopular there now, because he just gives the impression of hating Tottenham.
Yeah.
And I've always hated that. He's always, and in fairness, this is back from as soon as he began at Tottenham, Conte has cultivated this perception that I'm too big for here. No, he's not. Tottenham is a big, big job. You're in the Premier League, you're in London, you're in a massive new stadium now. Like, how many, like, you don't have the biggest budget in the Premier League, but you'll have a bigger budget than if he goes back to Serie A. I never got that idea that he was too good for Spurs.
His logic, and he said it at one stage, was, why should I protect them anymore?
Yeah.
Imagine you're Conte and you see a dressing room which is dishonest, which is basically what he's saying. They're a dishonest bunch. I'm paid a lot of money. 15 million.
Yeah.
I'm paid a lot of money. The players are paid a lot of money. He knows what it takes. He's seen what it takes. And he sees just a really selfish, dishonest bunch who are happy to swim downstream, immersed in lovely mediocrity. Why should he protect them? If that's his perspective.
Yeah, but like, I mean, you don't go out and you don't make your job untenable while you're doing it. Like, you still have your job at 15 million euros to motivate these guys. And I don't think, in fairness, like, Kenny Cunningham's comments are making me kind of second guess myself a little bit, because I never heard someone with credibility say that before, as Kenny has.
He was surprisingly strong. Just this Matt Doherty, Kenny Cunningham, Antonio Conte triangle.
I know.
I'm in it. I'm in that triangle.
But I never would have thought that these are, in John Giles' phrase, bad pros. I'm really, really surprised at that perception. But obviously, it exists. Like, people with a lot more experience and knowledge of the game than me are saying it. So it's definitely worth sizing up. But I still have to say that Conte, he obviously was an emotional reaction. I also felt it was quite calculated and self-serving, and I really thought it was slightly nasty. I really thought the street to it, and there was just kind of this dismissive tone about it, and then using, like, he knows what he's doing when he's talking about this is the story of Tottenham. Like, he knows what he's echoing there. I thought that was nasty and gratuitous.
Well, it was reported that Daniel Levy almost was like, can we clarify what you mean by the same owner? To what extent am I the problem as well? And he said, no, it's about the players.
I know, and what's your impression of Conte speaking truth to power? Like, there will be a strain of supporter that will look at this and say, he's dead right. In the way that people would look at Mourinho criticising the hierarchy latter days at Chelsea, at Manchester United, and elsewhere he's been saying he's dead right. Thank God someone is saying these things.
Yeah. Well, I think there probably is something culturally very wrong at Spurs, and we briefly glimpsed how good they could all be under Pochettino at their peak. There is something inexplicable about their up and down performances.
Are they really that up and down though?
I think they are. I think when they're bad, they are atrocious.
They are. They've been atrocious this season at times under Conte.
And when they're good, they're excellent.
Yeah. What are they? I mean, they could still finish in the top 4. Like, relative to their wage budget, they're actually doing pretty well. You know, I don't get this. There is an impression that Spurs are like this kind of sad sack ace and like the perennial underachievers. Yeah. But like, and I know Daniel Levy has made a lot of mistakes, and like there were massive strategic errors in not backing Pochettino at a point of strength, and then sacking him was a silly idea.
Yeah,
Mourinho was the wrong appointment. I thought Conte was a good appointment. As it turned out, it hasn't worked out. But at the same time, obviously they could have spent more on transfers. But like, if football was an even moderately sane business world or business model, it's actually done pretty well. Like, they've built this amazing new stadium that will guarantee revenues going into the future and fix Tottenham as a major club.
Yeah.
And in fairness, you could scoff at it. They were going to be in the Super League. Like, I mean, they are on merit in a way a super club, and they haven't gone. I don't know if Tottenham were ever guaranteed that status. So like, you know, Liverpool and Man United were always going to be guaranteed. If there was a Super League at any point in, you know, the history of English football, Liverpool and Man United would have been in it. Chelsea and Man City are in it now thanks to their falling into wealth, shall we say. Like, if Tottenham were poorly managed, they would have gone the same way as Everton. Like, I mean, when the Premier League was formed, there was a big five of Arsenal, Man United, Liverpool, Everton and Tottenham. And like, Everton have been farcically managed and are now kind of perennial relegation battlers. Whereas Tottenham, through, I think there's an element of good management about it. It's very prudent. Of getting them to where they are. And I think that, you know, Tottenham are 5th or 6th in the league or wherever on merit might end up there. Someone has to finish there because other clubs have more money than them and they can afford seemingly to spend while incurring massive losses. So look, obviously they've made big mistakes, but I don't agree with this idea that they're kind of a shambles.
Me neither. Erling Haaland we should just touch on before we get into Republic of Ireland week. 42 in 37.
It's mad, isn't it? I saw the 42 goals thing and I thought, is that like a projected mark to the end of the season? And then you realise, oh my God.
Are we watching him now slip from 4th gear into 5th gear? Last couple of weeks, it feels like that, and it feels like with Man City generally. I have to say, there's been various points of the season where we're waiting for Man City to go on their run, you know, when it comes into the season's end, and they just seem to go on 10, 11, 12 match winning runs. It feels like they've finally kicked into gear on that front. It feels like Man City are now adapting a little bit better to playing with him. They're basically passing him the ball, and it was the second goal against Leipzig that kind of showed everything about him, in that he sprinted to press the goalkeeper knocked it long, then Akanji played it forward first time, which is not what City would always do, and Haaland was there battling to win the knockdown for, was it De Bruyne's volley off the crossbar, and Haaland had already turned and gone in to anticipate that ball coming off the crossbar to score, you know, an easy tap in. So there is something. I mean, the only thing that's not really spectacular about Haaland are his finishes, because they're all seemingly from 3 or 4 yards. But then watching him in general play, he's utterly spectacular. So I have seen he pulled out of the Norway squad this week with a slight groin issue, which was interesting timing, you have to say. But just extraordinary. And like, I assume he's going to be a shoe-in for Player of the Year. Like Saka and Odegaard, I think, are the other contenders. You watch Saka sometimes and you think, how can this guy not be Player of the Year, because the goals he scores are so spectacular, but just the numbers are crazy. Like, and he's doing them, you know, like Messi and Ronaldo reset the benchmark. It was Dixie Dean back in the 1940s, then Ronaldo and Messi. But the rate at which Haaland is scoring, especially in the Champions League, is actually at a rate better, certainly than those guys were at in the early part of their career. So it's just it's absolutely mind-boggling. It is. 37 games isn't even fair. It's like, how many games did Pep haul him off after a hat-trick, you know?
And what was the line after Leipzig? It was just like, basically, there'll be no more worlds to conquer. It's just like, I'm sure Haaland doesn't agree.
Yeah. Pep was in funny humour that night. That was Julia Roberts.
That was Julia Roberts' gate, yeah. And Conte, in fairness to him, the absolute wind-up merchant that he is, also did mention, oh yeah, she came to Spurs as well.
I love that goal as well that you mentioned, the De Bruyne volley, because, I don't know, I mean, he's 2 or 3 yards the wrong side. I mean, the defender is goal side 2-3 yards when De Bruyne hits that shot. I just don't think most forwards are that bothered sprinting in on the 5% chance hits the crossbar and comes back to him.
Yeah, no, it's insane, and like I guess it's redefining what for defenders, like what's good positioning and everything like that. I mean,
if you're playing Haaland, if De Bruyne is hitting a shot from 35 yards, you now have to go, oh Jesus.
Yeah, because
right, come on, let's go early.
You always hear about guys like Mark Sykes was doing press yesterday, and he's talking about playing against City for Bristol, and it's just like, and he used the well-trodden line. It's just like you switch off for a moment, they punish you. Yeah. But Haaland has reset that again. That's not even switching off in a way, you seem like, okay, you switch off, you lose your position where the ball is, in play or whatever, but you just, it just completely redefines those that paradigm. So it's just it's been crazy to watch.
Yeah, it sure has. We have to talk Ireland, Latvia tomorrow, and then they play France. We're going to take a very short break. Our football show coverage is brought to you with thanks to Sky, where you can watch all the big Premier League games on Sky and BT Sport. We're taking a very short break. Back with Gavin Cooney, the 42, in just one moment.
Football on Off the Ball
with Sky. Watch Premier League, Women's Super League, EFL, Scottish Premiership and much more live on Sky Sports.
With Gillette Labs, get the ultimate shave or your money back. Neon Night Edition available now.